Welcome to the Lore Tours of DefenseCon 2956. My name is Paul Shelley, and this is TheAstroHistorian, a channel dedicated to exploring and explaining the lore of sci-fi and space universes and discussing their impact. These are segments of live recordings I did on Twitch and YouTube where I walked through the event and shared the backstory of the manufacturers and the ships on the floor. I do these tours live every time they do a convention in game, which is always great fun to do. However, these are not my normal standard of video, so I wanted to let you know ahead of time that these are very minimally edited and retain a lot of the live flavor, if you will. I do a lot of riffing, and while I do have notes, a lot of this is me pulling stuff from my memory. Think of this as an experiment, as I know many folks who have wanted to catch these live, but may have not been able to get through the whole session. Thus, this is the closest to an all-killer, no-filler that I can get at the moment with these sorts of events. As always, let me know if you like that sort of thing, because I can do this pretty much every event, if y'all like to. If this is not your thing, no worries. We'll be doing more videos, normal videos, here in the next couple of weeks. With that all being said, sit back, relax, grab a snack, it's gonna be a long one as you can see, and enjoy the full lore tour of DefenseCon 2956. So, Drake is an interesting situation, because Drake was founded, see if I can find the actual date. Oh, it's on my hat. 2845. So there was an event called a contest called the Volksfighter Contest. The idea behind the Volksfighter Contest was that the UEE at the time was suffering from the UE Navy specifically had very low funds. There wasn't a lot of money going to the Navy to deal with the problems that were happening at the time. We're talking about the 2840s. To put this in context, the cargo crisis was in full swing. They were still trying to replace a lot of the aging Aegis ships with new content, with new ships, but they didn't have a lot of money flowing around. So the idea behind the Volksfighter Contest was the idea of creating what the UEE was calling frontier squadrons to train pilots who were going to be working on the frontier exclusively. And so they needed a fighter that could function well for frontier conditions. And they sent out a call for manufacturers to build a fighter to help them do this sort of frontier fighter concept. And a small group of engineers, led by lead engineer Jan Dredge, came up with their own take on how to solve this problem. And what they created was the AS-1 Cutlass. This was very similar to the Cutlass we see today, and we'll talk about it when we look at the Cutlass steel. But it really stood out because it was very cheap, it was very easy to maintain, and it had benefits like extra cargo that most fighters wouldn't have. So it could function as a multi-role vessel beyond just being a fighter. The team that created the AS-1 Cutlass were very, very okay with it. They loved the concept, but the issue was the UEE didn't. They instead went with what's known as the Aegis Wildcat, a ship we've never heard of since then. And even the lore sort of sasses it, saying that it's sort of fallen out of existence. Like, nobody remembers it, even in the verse anymore. So what the team that made the Cutlass team did was they created their own company specifically to sell the Cutlass to the public. because they knew there was an audience for it. So they created Drake Interplanetary. Now, what is Drake Interplanetary? Like, what is it? Why is it named Drake Interplanetary? Because it sounds smooth. There's no real reason behind it. It was pure marketing, pure showmanship. It sounded good, so they used it. But Drake effectively was formed specifically to sell the Cutlass. Since then, Drake has gotten better and better at making ships. And those ships all sort of evolved from the Cutlass. There is no Caterpillar on the floor, but we'll talk a little bit about the Caterpillar because the Ironclad is sort of a descendant of the Caterpillar. But we also have to talk a little bit about the evolution of Drake, so we can understand a lot of what's happening. The problem that Drake had was that they became super popular super quickly. So like people loved the Cutlass, and it was very, very good for what it did. But because it was very good and very cheap, other people began to buy it, which were not so savory. And as a result, the Cutlass began to be known as both a very good frontier fighter and a very good frontier fighter for pirates, outlaws, and smugglers. And because it was so good, it quickly became the go-to outlaw vehicle. And so they earned a very bad reputation very quickly for Cutlasses. Now they did diversify. They made things like the Vulture. They made things like the first thing they made after the Cutlass was actually the Caterpillar. But you know, they made the Vulture. They made the gosh, I want to try and blank on the name of it. The Cutter. They made eventually would make things like the Kraken, the Corsair, various different variations on the Cutlass. All of these were sort of an attempt to sort of diversify out of just the Cutlass. Though they were criticized routinely for every ship just being a version of a Cutlass. The Vulture was literally an evolution from an experimental Cutlass. So you can kind of see where a lot of Drake's sort of motifs comes from just versions of the Cutlass. Even the Caterpillar is sort of a Cutlass with stuff stuck around it. And this was doing fine, and it did okay, but they still stick this sort of this outlaw personality, which they really did lean into. And the thing that really, really stuck with them is when they went to go choose a headquarters right after the huge success of the initial Cutlass, they chose specifically Magnus, the system of Magnus, the planet of Berea, in the city of Odessa of Odessa in Berea. Now, Odessa, the reason why this is important is Odessa was the shipyards for the UE Navy for a very, very long time. But because the UE Navy refused to let the people of Odessa and the people of Berea in general sort of out from the boot of military control, because it was a restricted system where only people who worked with the military could live, but the military stopped using the system for decades, but still had the system classified as a military system. And no matter what the locals who had moved there to go work on these ships, and now were just sort of stuck there, wanted, they weren't allowed to. So there was a very bitter resentment in Berea about the UE, because the UE literally abandoned them and then refused to let them legally succeed. So when Drake came in, that was sort of a message to the UEE that, like, well, you didn't like us, you didn't like what we did, so we're going to go to a place that doesn't like you, and we're going to save it. We're going to spit in your eye because we're going to save Odessa. We're going to save Berea. And while that was the sort of narrative of what Drake was doing, the reality was that nobody wanted to go there because it was kind of seedy by that point. But there were dozens, hundreds, maybe thousands of warehouses and dry dockyards and shipyards that the UE Navy had abandoned, which were still perfectly good, that had been building ships for generations. And all that Drake had to do was come in and modernize those dockyards rather than building brand new ones. It was a cost-saving measure for Drake. They did it because it was efficient, not because it was sending a message. It just so happened to also send a message, so Drake leaned into the, yeah, we're outlaws, we're rebels, sort of adopting the mythos of the Berea system, which is the frontier system that's in the interior of the in the core systems of the system of the UEE. And so that's sort of how Drake has evolved. They've always been sort of I don't know what the right word is. Not anti-societal, but like they've always been rebellious. They've always been actively antagonistic to the UEE as part of a marketing scheme. So that worked, but it didn't work when Drake's ships were being used excessively for piracy. And in 2945, a undercover reporter was doing a big expose on the Cutlass and the amount of times the Cutlass had been used specifically to for outlaw attacks, and managed to get into Drake and get to talk secretly with Jan Dredge, and who the founder. And when they asked Jan specifically, aren't you a little worried about the Drake, the usage of your ships for outlaw, for crime? She basically said, listen, if they have the money, I don't care what they do with it. It's none of my business. As long as they pass their background checks, as long as it's legal to sell to them, then I'm going to sell to them. If it's not illegal to sell to somebody with money, if they're okay. That went fucking, it went, the right term for it is super viral. And there was a lot of pressure because it made Jan Dredge sound like she was actively, knowingly selling to pirates, and thus was going beyond just the mystique. So she stepped down. Her son took over until a new CEO could be discovered, and shortly thereafter, a man by the name of Andon Arden, the current CEO of Drake Interplanetary, who you see in some of these videos that have been coming out recently, took over Drake Interplanetary. Now, Andon Arden is famous because he's infamous because he is known for taking over companies that are in financial difficulties and then basically stripping them for parts. He's sort of a vulture. He comes in to struggling companies, pulls them apart, and then kind of destroys the actual companies themselves. And so for the longest time, people thought Andon Arden was going to do exactly that. He was going to dismantle Drake for parts, sell the ships off to different manufacturers, and then leave, slash and burn. But instead, Andon has fully embraced Drake Interplanetary and its sort of mystique, its motif. He seems to revel in the spotlight that has brought him. And his big move was to move Drake away from military-facing vehicles and ships and more towards industry vehicles. Since he's took over, his main platform that he's decided to copy is not the Cutlass, but the Vulture. And basically every ship that has been made since Andon Arden's arrival, except for the Kraken, which was I think greenlit before his arrival, has been mostly industry facing and almost entirely Vulture adjacent. Remember, most of Drake's ships before this were variations on the Cutlass, and in Arden's Drake is variations on the Vulture. Especially, you can especially see it in the engines. They've effectively adopted the VTOL engines from the Vulture, which makes sense. The VTOL engines on the Vulture were actually experimental VTOL engines designed for a possible upgrade to the Cutlass.
and it never really took off. But they've discovered that they work really well, not on the Cutlass. Kraken can be used for industry, but the timing seems to indicate that like the Kraken was introduced the same year that Andon Arden took over, and its advertisement is much more military facing or combat facing. So since then, Andon Arden has embraced the Drake ethos of sort of like down with the UEE, up with the industry. In fact, when he had a chance to host IAE a couple years ago, the host of the IAE always gets to choose the theme. And his theme was effectively, the government will abandon you, overthrow the government. And the board at IAE was like, whoa, it's a little too intense for us. So it became something like freedom or independence or something like that, which has sort of become their mantra. So with that all being said, let's take a look at some of these ships, starting with the newest ship over here, the Pitbull. Now this is Andon Arden's first real military vessel or combat vessel that he's been under his kind of stewardship. It has 6 guns, 2 size 2s, 4 size 1s, plus 6 size 1 missiles. It is the same size as a Fury. Now, there is a meta reason for that, because they wanted to make it the same size as a Fury, so they could use the same platforms. But there's also a lore reason for this. What you may not realize is that the Drake and MISC are heated rivals. They absolutely hate one another. They take pot shots at each other as much as they possibly can. And it all stems from the Vulture. The Vulture specifically was invented to salvage a ship that MISC lost, a whole sea that MISC lost, famously disappeared this whole sea, and they took a huge reputational beating from it because it was sort of like a malfunction on the hull itself. Like the hull itself was faulty, and so they famously set out this challenge. If you can salvage this ship, get the black box, and get the valuable cargo on board, which was like art and a couple other things, then we will give you like several million credits. So Drake took an experimental Cutlass, modified it, and then it got the black box and the material out for MISC. And then MISC refused to give them the money because Drake copied the black box, because they wanted to know what the problem was so that they could exploit it. What the flaw was in the whole C's design. So they went to court and all this sorts of things. But since then, Drake and MISC have been going shot for shot at each other. They hate each other. But I think it's more Drake sort of revels in pooping on them, whereas MISC sort of grumbles at them. It's sort of like a one-way rivalry where Drake is sort of doing this for the love of the game. They're doing it for the love of the troll, and MISC is seeing them as like an honorable rival that they have to beat. They have to outplan them and outdesign them. And Drake's just like, here you go. We'll make it to Fury, but more guns, so we're better. And it's not alien. Humanity, yes. So, like, just in lore, we don't have any lore behind it, but I guarantee you when they come out with lore, this is just Drake going, we can't let MISC have the Fury. We can't let them have this market. We need to come in and we need to poop on them. The Mule. We don't have a lot of information on the Mule, but the Mule is pretty recent. This is a pre-Andon Arden vehicle, but a lot of the Mule sort of interior has eventually kind of come off to help with other ships like the Golem. The Dragonfly. So the Dragonfly itself is unique because the Dragonfly was developed specifically with the Caterpillar. It was developed alongside the Caterpillar. And it's a revolution in human design because the Dragonfly was designed with anti-grav technology. Now, humanity had been exposed to and had versions of anti-grav technology for a very long time. But they never used anti-grav to the degree that this vehicle has, simply because it's very power hungry and it's not as reliable, especially with larger ships. So Drake was experimenting with creating sort of a snub ship for the Caterpillar, and they came up with the Dragonfly, using all of the more modern innovations that had happened with power supplies and those sorts of things. And it was so revolutionary that it actually inspired the Nox. When the Dragonfly made its way to the frontier, it actually made its way to a place, I can't remember the name of it, but it's a moon where the Xi'an and humanity, Xi'an and humans actually live in harmony with each other. They live in their own colonies, but they live on the same moon, and they have meetings and conversations, that kind of stuff. The idea is this sort of a cohabitation, like we've mended the wounds of the Cold War sort of thing. And so one of the farmers, human farmers, got their hands on a Dragonfly to use as transportation around their farm, and they took it over to their Xi'an neighbors and let them try it out. The Xi'an neighbors absolutely adored the Dragonfly, and they started talking all about it, and they told the people, the Xi'an back home, about the Dragonfly and how much fun it was. And the Xi'an went, "We've never thought of that. We were masters of anti-grav and we didn't think of a bike? We should do this. We should make a bike." So they made the Nox. The Aopoa made the Nox, which is effectively a Dragonfly knockoff. It's kind of cool. Drake is actually fairly innovative. There's lots of stories about like the Cutlass Red. Willis Ops is not Willis Ops. I can't remember the name of the Cutlass Red's technology, but the Cutlass Red's technology is fairly advanced for what they did. They're really good at innovating when it comes to making stuff smaller, while also boosting things like sensor technology. All right, let's go over here. I could have sworn there was a cutter on the floor. All right, let's take a look at the Clipper. So the thing about the Clipper is that this is the Andon Arden-like machine. This and the cutter are the epitome of Andon Arden's design. Now, if you notice, this engine here is very similar to the engines on a Buccaneer. And it's also very similar to the engine on the back of the Pitbull. Because a lot of this same engine designs are micro scale or scaled up or scaled down for what they need. Because they try to reuse the same stuff. I'm going to go use this elevator to go up a little higher. But here inside, we've got the crafter, we've got medical bed, and it's clear that this ship was designed with that sort of industrial purpose. Got its own living quarters, very similar to the Clipper. It's not almost directly modeled after the Clipper. Easy access from engineering. This sort of design when it comes to the interior of engines. Inside of the Ironclad has a similar one. There's a couple different versions of the Drake ships that have this same sort of engine interior that it's like visible when you move around. So they like to reuse parts. All right. Let's head over to the Cutlass Steel and we'll talk a little bit about the Cutlasses. Just to give you context, the Clipper, the Mule, the Pitbull, the Ironclad, and the Cutter, the modern Cutter, were all made in the last 10 years. So like under and in Arden. All right, the Cutlass. The brainchild of Jan Dredge and her team. The original Drake ship. The Cutlass itself is unique because its design was effectively flexible enough to be anything you wanted to. This central bay has been transformed into a flying medical hospital using state-of-the-art, at the time unproven, brand new technologies from Bioticorp. The Bioticorp med beds were completely untested. Nobody trusted them, but Drake saw the med beds as potential and asked for them to put them into the Cutlass Red. So like Drake was the first company to use those med beds. Everyone else now uses them, and the Cutlass Reds were the first ships to not only have them, but use them in an emergency and prove how useful they were. They saved the entire planetary council, all of the governors of Berea during a terrorist attack, because experimental Cutlass Reds that just had been manufactured were pressed into service to go rescue them. So, the Cutlass Reds had a lot of innovation pushed into them. The blue was sort of done specifically for law enforcement as a way of trying to correct the Cutlass's the AS-1's Cutlass's problems or reputation. And the AS-1 Cutlass is we now know as the Cutlass Black. The original one was AS-1, the destination. And the steel, I always like to say that the steel is the ultimate evolution of a Cutlass, because around the time the steel was released, several other ships were becoming popular in the verse, especially the why am I blanking on the name? Not the Asgard. The Valkyrie. The Valkyrie had been getting more popular. The latest versions were being sold to civilians. And what Drake did was said, oh, the Valkyrie is popular with civilians. How about we make our own Valkyrie with a Cutlass? Stick some drop seats in and put more guns on it and up armor the hell out of it. Yeah, it's not going to get you very far, but we can drop more people in one of our ships than you can in a Valkyrie. And that's its evolution. This is simply a response to Anvil creating something that they think that they could as well. There is no limit to how many variations Cutlasses can have. We are likely to see more, but this is sort of the beauty of the Cutlass, because all Cutlasses have the same front area, lockers, weapon. I don't even know what these are called. Weapons stand, weapon lockers, personal storage, beds, turret, pilot, co-pilot. This area is same throughout every single Drake Cutlass. And the back section here is the one that's modular that can swap out. So as long as Drake can make Cutlasses, they can make variations on them. And that's the reason why they're so popular, because they're so flexible, because they're so cheap. And in a little bit of meta thing, in my opinion, is the first time that CIG, the developers of Star Citizen, really did manage to capture the lore and sort of identity of a manufacturer is the Cutlass. The Cutlass is popular in the game for the same reasons why it's popular in lore. People just love it. And it's one of the reasons why so many people have fallen in love with the Drake brand, because this sort of represents that sort of rugged independence. You can do what you want. You can pretty much do anything you need to. It doesn't do anything specifically good, but it can do a lot of stuff okay. And that jack of all trades, master of none is sort of the hallmark of what Drake has become. All right, let's talk enough gushing about the best ship in the verse. One of the best ships in the verse. And let's move to the Ironclad. So the Ironclad and the Ironclad Assault are the latest evolution of the attempt for Drake to clean up its image. These are evolutions of the Caterpillar. Now, the Caterpillar was the first ship that Drake built out after the Cutlass. Built sometime in 50s or 60s, I think. Find it. Find the actual name. 2871. The 2871. It was built to both clean up Drake's image and to take advantage of the ongoing cargo crisis, where a lot of the original cargo manufacturing, or the manufacturers of cargo vessels in the verse, in the UEE, had disappeared with the fall of the Mezzers. And while MISC had been doing some good things to improve upon that with the whole series, there was still a call for frontier, cheap, but internal storage vessels. So Jan Dredge helped design what we know today as the Caterpillar. The point of the Caterpillar was to be cheap. So it looked ugly. It handled like garbage. But it was very inexpensive compared to its competitors, and it was modular. And that modular flexibility made it super popular with Kovalex and other companies like that for their frontier shipping, where they could guarantee pressurized containers, and they could go very long distances and have very low maintenance costs. So let's go inside. Someone's asking, you know, the lore behind Drake having bad lighting. There's a comment that they made on the latest Star Citizen Live, where the developers were kind of mad about the poor lighting that was in the Ironclad. But the easy answer is Drake is cheap. That's the answer. All right, so let's learn a little bit about the Ironclad. Now, the Ironclad itself is sort of an evolution of the... let's go up to the top. Here, I think. Go up to operations. We can go out from the operations area. The Ironclad is more of a response to the on the exterior. There's an exterior somewhere. Down here. Popped up. You have to leave me chat to find the exterior, because this is just a ladder. Is it up to the top? Command pod. Owner. Oh, right here. No, this isn't it. Second floor. Okay. Go down to the second floor. I saw the airlock, which I know is over here. But I thought there was an exterior, like, Oh, it's right here. No, this isn't it. Goes up to operations. Become one. Is it over here? Ah, here it is. There we go. All right, roof access. There we go. I wanted to go up here so I can show you something. This ship specifically is more of an evolution of the original idea behind the Caterpillar, simply because not only is it bigger, but take a look at these engines right here. Tell me what type of engines they are. Are these Cutlass engines or are these Vulture engines? Come on back here. You see the same thing. Down there. What do you see down there? Are these engines Cutlass engines or Vulture engines? So, the Ironclad itself is designed as Andon Arden's version of the Caterpillar. Cheap, easy to modify, but bigger and more industrial. You can think of this as sort of Andon Arden's version of Drake. This is sort of that ultimate expression of Drake. Though, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of lore behind it. All right, let's head out. Head back down. Yeah, we might have some more here in the future. I'm going to head over to the Corsair. Talk a little bit about that. If it's industrial, why does it have so many weapons? It's still a Drake ship. The Drake design philosophy fundamentally is it needs more weapons. You can always put more weapons because Drake believes fundamentally that it's a dangerous universe and it's better to be prepared and not need it than to not be prepared at all. And that's sort of their, not just their mantra and ethos, but it's also their approach to ship design in general. They are selling booze on the showroom floor, actually. Where is the... I'll go show you all in a moment. But this is the Corsair. Now, the thing about the Corsair that's important to note is that the Corsair itself is an Andon Arden design. You can see back here, the engines themselves mirror that of the Andon Arden design styles. Though more of the circular rather than the horizontal. But its main purpose is exploration. Now, the joke is it's designed to explore the inside of other people's hulls, but it is an exploration ship. And the thing that is unique about this ship when it was designed is that it is specifically designed for the comfort of the user. This is the first Drake ship that had personalized cabins. This was an innovation for Drake and offered a luxury that not even RSI was giving, or even, I believe, Anvil with its own Carrack. had individual cabins for its crew. But this is the first real break from the trend that Drake had under Ed and Arden, in that because this is dedicated towards exploration, was marketed as an exploration ship, was sold as an exploration ship, people saw it as an exploration ship. And a lot of these creature comforts here that you don't see on like military and other ships sort of really emphasized that. The Corsair is a place that was designed to be a home, where you have areas like here, the engineering bay, which is designed to be easy access to all the different things you need to access. And it's right next to effectively an EVA room. This whole area is a ready room, but it has EVA. It's got its own airlock. It's got everything you need for a crew to operate in vacuum. And then it's got a nice cargo bay back here for enough cargo space to carry a exploration rope. This ship has long range, it has firepower to defend itself, and it has everything you need for life on the frontier. And that's sort of the not just the point of the ship, but also the direction that Drake was going under Anda. Defend itself. Listen, it's defense. Even if they have to preemptively strike, it's a defense. Now let's go talk about the Buccaneer, because the Buccaneer is also another unique thing. Oh, we do have the cutter. Okay, I thought we had a cutter here. So the Buccaneer is another Drake staple. What we see here with the Buccaneer is a philosophy that Drake has, specifically that every vehicle that they make needs to support another vehicle in their fleet. The Mule supports both the Ironclad, but also the Caterpillar. And the Buccaneer was built to be more directly, much more of an actual fighter compared to the Cutlass. And this fighter was designed not only to match well with the Cutlass, but have the speed of the Herald. This is designed to be a Herald escort. It has it almost can go exact same speed in a straight line. The Pitbull is designed to go inside an Ironclad assault. It can work on its own, but it's designed to work in tandem with an assault. Everything in Drake's lineup is designed to work together. The idea being, you could buy one of every Drake ship that exists and be covered for absolutely anything that you need. So, talk about Drake anti-grav technology, but I don't know what they're putting in the schmaltz. So that's the unique thing, is that the Clipper itself is sort of a standout because it's designed to be more like the Corsair in that it's more independent. I'd have to go digging into the details of the Clipper, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Clipper worked well with the Buccaneer and the Cutlass in terms of its speed and maneuverability. Thank you, capitalism. Oh, I gotta turn those off because otherwise it'll. I don't even have those activated here. That's right. So if we're gonna get a raid for those of you who are watching this on YouTube after the fact on Twitch. So if they come in, just know that that's the thing. I know. I saw that crazy stuff. All right, so let's talk a little bit about Andon Arden's baby. Now, this is not new. The Drake the Drake cutter is fundamentally Drake's answer to the Aurora as a starter ship. And I got this rowdy group of 2,000 people coming in when I'm trying to do a nice, quiet tour and give these people a little bit of history. Welcome, everyone, from Space Invader Stream. I'm currently doing my lore tour here on the floor of DefenseCon 2956. We're talking a little bit about Drake Interplanetary, the people who are hosting DefenseCon, their history and their ships. We'll take a question and answer session here at the end, but we're kind of talking a little bit about this ship itself. Welcome, everybody. I will dance later, Tomato. This is not the time for dancing. I'm in the middle of a lore tour. Your day should be ruined. You should know better. Bad Tomato. So, this existed before Andon Arden took over Drake. However, when he took over Drake, they completely and utterly redesigned the ship for the purpose of appealing to the average space pilot. The engines were taken from the Vulture. The interior was taken from the Vulture, very similar to the interior here. And the thing that made this very unique was that this is one of the only starter ships with not only a space for you to like sit down and sleep, and also have things like a weapons rack and equipment pack, but a bathroom. Almost none of the starter ships in the verse have a bathroom. This is not just a ship. This is a mobile home. This is the beginning of the rebrand, where Drake is not just telling you that it's the rugged, rough and tumble ship for the every person. But the background is clipping through here. But a ship for the average person. Anyone can use a Drake ship because Drake is built for everyone. It's built for you to rely on for whatever you need. Roberts Space Industries. Roberts Space Industries is unique simply because in of itself, up on Discord, Roberts Space Industries of itself is the oldest manufacturer in the Star Citizen universe. Hands down, there is no any manufacturer that is older than RSI. It is also one of the most important manufacturers in the Star Citizen universe simply because it does also represent, I'm turning the volume a little bit down, a little bit more. It seems like it's a little loud. RSI is the start of the universe. Without RSI, nothing that would happen could happen. So when I say that RSI was founded in 2038, you know that I'm talking about a company that goes way back. It was founded by the inverse version of Chris Roberts, who was trying to compete with a lot of the other private space industries that were viable at that time, and didn't really find a way of getting into space itself, despite being named private space industries. They had done everything from like cricket farming to deal with famine, better power transitions. They'd done a lot of different things that would be needed for space exploration and space colonization, but they didn't actually make ships. And it wasn't until 2075 when Chris Roberts stumbled upon the graduate thesis of one Dr. Childers. Dr. Childers was messing with a new type of material that they had discovered called quantanium. Now, quantanium had a unique feature and a unique thing that was happening with it, where it would fundamentally change the mass of a particle. So you had how do I put this? It could create negative mass with the quantanium particle itself. And Dr. Childers decided to experiment and came up with an idea that if you used it in combination with other elements of an Alcubierre drive, that you could create an Alcubierre drive with quantanium. Chris Roberts was thumbing through graduate theses for possible candidates for hire and for new ideas, came upon Dr. Childers' thesis, liked it, talked with him, and gave him the funds he needed to be able to create the first quantum fusion engine. The quantum fusion engine was created towards the end of the 21st century and really kicked off the revolution that we would see in space travel. It significantly shortened time for travel, and there are some like downsides to it. Like, it was very hot, so it required very large ships or some way of cooling it down. There wasn't a lot of coolers at the time, but it did shorten the travel time to Mars from being several years to being like a couple of months. So it would take like 1 or 2 months to get to and from Mars. And to the outer solar system, it was like a year or two. So it allowed for reasonable travel times across space. Since then, they created the first atmospheric processors, which were designed to help terraform worlds. They specifically helped terraform Mars. They created the first ever commercially viable ship, like basically the Model T of spaceships, which was in the RSI Zeus. They produced tons and tons and tons of ships and equipment for space exploration. They were heavily influential in the formation of the UNE, in the formation of the UNE Navy. A lot of the earliest warships that were built by humanity were RSI-built warships. RSI is the old man of the industry, and as a result, they pretty much have built every type of ship you can imagine. This before us has an interesting story, because this is sort of the evolution of the guy who would end up inspiring the foundation of Anvil Aerospace. Leonard Case was his name, worked for RSI, and managed to cut through a bunch of red tape and a bunch of bureaucracy by discovering some major flaws in this project known as the Starbright. And the RSI Starbright was supposed to come out in 2590, I think. He was part of the team, but he found some significant flaws that would kill a lot of people. His supervisors told him it's not that important. He said it is important, worked it all the way up to the top,
the management said this is too much of a risk, and they fired the management, his bosses, and put him in charge. But as part of that process, it delayed the Starbright release to 2600. But the 2600 Starbright, which was a fundamentally a luxury spacecraft, was designed specifically for ease of use. That design philosophy, he quit RSI shortly after that to go found Case Aerospace, where the Hurricane comes from. But, which eventually is now Anvil Aerospace. But his design philosophy that created the Starbright would lead to the creation of the first Aurora in 2659. This is sort of the next generation, the next evolution of the Aurora platform, the Aurora Mark II, which was released this year. So this is the second major leap in design since 2659. Now, why this is important? The Auroras were always designed for new pilots to use, to have fun, to be very forgiving, but still to maintain their maneuverability and livability. That approach made it so that the Aurora platform became, and still is, the preferred premier starter vessel for most people. The likelihood of people owning an Aurora in the verse is fairly high. Now, this is where the discussion comes up about who can own ships. Ships in the verse are kind of like vehicles in a lot of countries, like cars in a lot of countries. Most people can get by with public transportation in the Star Citizen universe, especially in like more settled systems. But if you live in a more remote system and you have to travel from, say, like a planet to a space station for work, then or travel around a planet for work, then you need a vehicle. And if you have a vehicle, the likelihood of you having one of these guys, the Auroras, is fairly high because they're that common. They're insanely cheap for RSI to make, and they're super common. There's parts of them all over the verse. And this is sort of a bold move for them to change it and introduce a new chassis with all new sorts of parts, but it seems like it shares a lot of parts with it and the Scorpius. So it's got a bed, it's got a suit locker, it's got small box storage here, it's got a fire extinguisher, it has gun racks, and so yeah, it's a fairly easy to use starter ship, as it were. Now, I think that is it for the Aurora here. We're gonna have to go back to the other side and look at the other ships. It's the Honda Civic of the verse. That is a great way of putting it, yes. Alrighty, the Perseus. The Perseus is the oldest ship in the Star Citizen universe that is still around. The original Perseus was designed in 2520, a full over 100 years before the Aurora. We're still talking 50 to 100 years before the Gladius and the Idris. The Perseus is a ship from a different time period. The original Perseus was created during a time where the UEE, at the time the UPE, was desperately trying to modernize. After the first contact with the Banu, the UEE or the UPE realized that it was woefully undergunned and under-equipped to deal with the majority of the species and the problems of the verse. Most of the Navy's vessels at the time were these massive, at that time, ancient capital ships. These big capital ships were important because you had to have a large size in order to have the power plants to be able to power a shield. And you needed the large size to be able to cool off your quantum engines and just generally deal with heat through radiation, because you couldn't do any of the other methods at the time. So smaller vessels weren't as reliable or as effective because they relied more on maneuverability or armor. The Perseus was sort of the first generation of ships to specifically deal with
the problems, to attempt to deal with the shortcomings of this. So it is heavily armored, but very slow. The original Perseus designs did not have shield technology. It wouldn't be until after the First Tavaran War that the first Perseuses would be getting shields. But effectively what these were designed to do was to be patrol boats. They were designed to stay on the interior of UPE space and scare off pirates or to intimidate local uprisings to prevent people from uprising and overthrowing local governments. Its first usage was specifically designed to deal with it, to deal with an uprising. There was the United Currency riots in Davian, and that riot was so bad that multiple Marines who had been called in to deal with the problem got killed during these riots. And it took the arrival of the Perseus that would just hang over the city, the main city, or the main conflict zone where this was taking place, that would cause the rioters to effectively give up, to surrender to the military. This is the first time anyone had seen this ship, has just arrived over on top of it. And that's the secret to the Perseus, is that the Perseus is designed to look mean. It's designed to look bigger than it is. It's designed to look tougher than it is. It's an intimidation factor. Its design ethos was to scare the enemy before firing. In fact, some of the early Perseus squadrons had the motto of something to the effect of never a shot fired, never a battle lost. Because the idea was that they wouldn't have to fight. These became the hallmarks of the Harry line, which we talked about last time, the line between the Xi'an and human space. And so these would patrol the Perry line constantly to try to keep their eyes out for the UEE, or for Xi'an issues and for smugglers and all that kind of stuff. And it served its well and served its purpose well throughout most of the conflict, the Cold War, the Xi'an Cold War. Fought in First Tavaran War, Second Tavaran War, Cold War. But it would, by the end of the Cold War, when the Mezzer era ended, most of the Perseuses had been well out of date and they weren't updated, so they'd been left to sort of rot. They'd been put into mothball. And the Perseuses wouldn't be activated again until 2946, when the invasion and battle of Oberon, I think it was Operation Overlord, I don't remember the name of it exactly, but it was the Battle of Oberon, took place, where Admiral Bishop had to rally as many ships as he could, basically any ship in the area, to defend the Oberon system, which is not a non-UEE system, but it has a lot of jump points to many other systems in the verse, because Oberon itself is one of the earliest systems humanity had discovered. So this was the first battle of the Retribution, and as part of this battle against a Vanduul clan that had invaded, a large clan that had invaded, a horde really, one part of the line was held by a handful of Perseuses, one of which was known as the UES Achilles. Now, the Vanduul seemingly have never actually fought, up to this point, had never really fought a Perseus, so they'd never really known what this was. And because of this, because of the massive amounts of armor that the ship was built with, because it was designed to deal with, before it had shields to deal with that issue, it was able to shrug off more attacks than ships twice its size, and was able to fight on multiple destroyers, like multiple maulers, and also I think one cruiser before it was disabled. But the Achilles, the UES Achilles, fought to the last man, kind of thing. It was eventually disabled, and I think the entire crew was killed. But that delaying action saved that flank and allowed for the Vanduul to be pushed away. Bishop was so impressed with the Achilles and the Battle of Achilles that that he specifically requested that the Perseus be rebuilt. He personally requested RSI to effectively bring the Perseus back up to the modern standards, but keep the same design and ethos that it had because of how good it was against the Vanduul. Now, the other advantage of this is that this thing is massive. These guns up here are size 8s. The original Perseuses had size 7 guns. So these things have been upgraded in terms of their guns. It has lots of armor. It has PDCs located just about all over the hull. It has its own turrets, like manned remote turrets. It has dozens of size 5 torpedoes, and even a cargo bay for holding cargo, as well as specifically vehicles like the Ursa. So this was designed, the modern Perseus here is designed as patrol vessel, as a supplement to a Hammerhead or a Polaris. You could think of this as one part of the puzzle. And the reason why the Perseus is important to examine is that it sort of represents the modern naval doctrine of the UEE, where personnel are low. They don't have enough personnel to do everything they want to. And an Idris, for instance, is very expensive to maintain and run. Not only does it require a lot of parts and labor to maintain, but a fully crewed Idris is over 100 people on board for a patrol. Whereas a fully crewed Perseus is less than a dozen, 6 to 12 people. So for the same amount of people that are on a Idris, you could have 10 Perseuses, or a couple of Perseuses, a couple of Polarises, a couple of Hammerheads or Tiburons, that sort of thing. These, and with almost as much, if not more, firepower in that as a result. And they can be in multiple places. So the idea is that these ships are designed to allow for smaller footprint in systems, but wider amounts of control and influence in those regions. So 40 size 5 torps, yeah. Curious if the AI would make their ships and have elections if possible. Are we talking about NPCs? Because AI is banned in the Star System universe. Sounds like the Perseus is a shock and awe ship. That's its main purpose, yes. It's designed, it's called the Subcap Slayer because it was designed to attack ships its size and smaller. It's designed to bully, to punch down. All right, so this is the Meteor. We don't know a lot about the Meteor. We're pretty sure it has, it's a modern ship, meaning it's been made fairly recently. So this ship itself is designed as sort of a blast cannon. It has a lot of firepower and has some living quarters, which can go into it. Got this weapons rack here. It's got bed. It's got all the internal components you need. Plus, of course, it has some storage. I think this area is a cargo area, possibly. But the main problem this thing has is it fundamentally is weak. It's pretty much it is a glass cannon. It's used mostly by militia and bounty hunters, but it is not widely used by the UE Navy or any other sort of government institutions as far as we know. And it's built off of the chassis of the Mantis, which is an earlier ship designed specifically to interdict and prevent ships from fleeing into Quantum. All right, so that is RSI that we have here on the floor. There are more you can get on the website and rent, but we're gonna go from here to the to Origin. So Origin is uniquely it's a very unique brand. The Origin brand is fundamentally tied to two things: performance engines and luxury. It's originally was founded in around 2750. What makes it one of the older manufacturers, but at the time they were mostly producing large ships or large engines for the military and other specialized engines for luxury ships created by people like RSI and Aegis Dynamics. It was founded on the banks of the Rhine in Cologne, Germany. And it would take a while before they would finally produce their own ships. It wouldn't be until close to the middle of the 29th century, so a year later, or almost almost a century later, that they would produce their first ships. Now, they were producing ships, it sounds like, that were more on demand for yachts. So like very specialty yachts, not built in assembly line, but built custom for individual clients. But by the middle of the 29th century, we had a situation called the cargo crisis. And the cargo crisis itself was the result of many of the old Meser-based companies that would build things like cargo vessels, cargo transports, that sort of thing, disappearing because they were so tightly connected to the Mesers. The result is that the first ever real mass assembly ships that Origin built was the 600. The Origin 600 was the first ever major ship it produced, and it was a cargo ship. The 600i that we have in game now is a version of that, where they stripped out the interior and replaced it with a much more luxurious interior. But the original 600 is the same exterior as the 600i. It's just had most of its space was dedicated to just cargo. So it was sort of a large bulk freighter. And the biggest thing was that sometime around the end of the 29th century, 2899, they produced the 300 series around 2899. But real quick. But the big shakeup they did was in 2913. They made a decision as one of the first major corporations to leave Earth. So they were founded on Earth in Germany, in Cologne. They left Earth and moved to New Austin on Terra, which has become known as Origin Town because it is the biggest manufacturer, like the biggest company in the city. And there they've been producing ships ever since. But that move did make them very, very... They made them a lot of enemies within the UEE, as well as within a lot of the sphere of influence of UEE corporations like RSI. They lost a couple contracts for this, and it was very controversial at the time because they sort of decided to throw in with the side of Terra in terms of the future rather than stick with Earth. Now, with that being said, we're going to skip the M80 for now. We're going to go to the 125A. The Origin has a very interesting relationship with the UEE military and combat in general. While most of their ships were designed specifically for the luxury brand, The 300, for instance, was an attempt to bring like sort of budget luxury to the everyman. The process of what they built garnered the attention of the military. Most famously, the M50 was tapped by the Advocacy to replace the Avenger, though that was seen as a mistake. It was still used. There's still a large fleet there's a squadron of ships of M50s, which is used by what's called Branson's Bolts, because I think it's Special Agent, I forget his first name, but maybe Charles Branson, something like that. Branson was sort of he became an expert pilot trained in pursuit and takedown, sort of an interceptor pilot. And he trained a special group, a special squadron of dedicated interceptor pilots for the Advocacy. You can think of it as kind of like the FBI's hostage rescue team, but for fleeing suspects. So if there's a place that has known for smugglers who might trick out their ships to run fast, that they would deploy the Branson's bolts to go and chase down and disable these groups as a means of doing so. But that sort of element of Origin led to what I'm going to call the 25A project, because the 300 had been out for quite some time by the time that the 325A was finally released. In fact, the 300 came out, and shortly after the 315 came out, and the 350 was in concurrent development around the same time as the 300. The 325A showed up about a decade or 2 decades after the last variant of the 300 had been released, and it was just sort of dropped with very little fanfare. And there's been some research to find out in which they found out that the 325A is almost certainly a military project. It was originally designed as a military project by the Navy. And for whatever reason, the Navy decided to drop the project, and it allowed the Origin to be able to clean up all of the top secret materials and then turn it into a fighter for commercial use. So the 125A is sort of the inheritor of that project, this program. It takes a lot of the same elements. I think it's got the same Willis Ops targeting radar or similar that the 325A has to function for more of a starter ship. So this is a starter ship, but it's a starter combat ship. The thing that defines the 100 series compared to everything else in the Origin lineup is the air system, the adaptive intake refinery. This was an experimental system that they built specifically to gather loose quantanium and loose hydrogen to try to refill tanks on the fly. These sort of scoops have existed in lore forever, but this system is designed to be much more efficient and directed. So you can basically sip fuel more. It lets you go further on your hydrogen stocks. And so the 125A was designed, or the 100 series was designed with that in mind. Now the 100 series is actually very old. It actually predates the 300. The problem was that it was too expensive, too heavy, and mostly a kind of proof of concept that Origin could build a small vessel. So it never really saw the light of day. So they brought back the 100s, in the 2950s or 2940s, late 2940s, as part of the air system, but also to try to compete with Consolid Outland and RSI in the starter ship market. Stocks. There are stocks in this game, yes, for lore. Alrighty, the M80. Now, I tell you the project about the 25A project because explaining that Origin and the Navy have had a relationship very specifically built around clandestine military actions, or they've had a secret relationship about building military vessels. The M80, it doesn't stand out as a result. Because of the nature of the militia mobilization initiative, anything that they build, as long as it is doesn't have top secret military equipment in it, can be sold to the public. So I believe that the M80, which is releasing this year at DefenseCon, is possibly also there's possibly a military version that exists somewhere in the verse that is dedicated to the UE Navy, and this is sort of the civilian version of that. But it's got a lot of the hallmarks of the 100 series and the 300 series. Got a similar sort of pointed front. It has, I believe, 2 size 5s and 2 size 4s on it in terms of weapons. These are the larger size. And then there's a sort of a hideaway panel somewhere around here that holds 2 more. Inside is very Spartan. Oh, the ones on the wings are the smaller ones? Okay. It's got a bed, but it has access to all the essential equipment in the inside here. It has a storage bay. It also has a weapons rack. And of course, it's got a pilot seat. What people don't know is it's got 2 SU of cargo back here in the very back. So, comes out here. So, the M80 is designed to sort of compete with the Guardian and the Scorpius, and that's sort of the heavy fighter lineup right there, but designed more for performance rather than just for firepower and damage, which is kind of Origin shtick. Less than half the whole HP of other heavies, though. Yeah, because its design is to be, I think they even said it's an interceptor, but it's a heavy interceptor rather than being a light interceptor. So it's more of a speed and maneuverability ship. All right, that's what's offering for Origin. Let's go talk about Kruger. Kruger Intergalactic. The Kruger Intergalactic was founded in 2558. Its founder was named Ozel Kruger. She built a workshop on her home planet of Berea in the Magnus system, almost certainly Odessa. And there, she mostly worked on building bespoke products, weapons, components, shields, shield generators, power plants, that kind of thing. So she would build very specific parts, but all components, but also specific parts. Like, you know, people would come to her and say, "Hey, I need a replacement panel for my ship." She would measure it out and then create a custom fit panel that would fit over the hole where that panel was before. And as a result, over time, she began to get more and more attention, especially since she was from Magnus. So the military came calling and started to hire her, because it was a military system, began to hire her to build replacement parts, bespoke replacement parts for specific ships. And from there, Kruger grew and grew and grew and became the parts manufacturer for Aegis, for RSI, for many of the old ship companies of the verse. And that was their secret, was that they made parts, bolts, panels, subcomponents, that sort of thing. And as a result, for most of their life, they were known as sort of a bits and pieces company. It wasn't until 2751 when things started to change. When Magnus's military industrial complex sort of status collapsed in 2751, it maintained, like, it sort of collapsed the economy. So Kruger became the only thing holding up the economy, keeping people working. The problem was that as the military left, outlaws and gangs began to move in. So every shipment that Kruger would make out of the system became more and more dangerous until 2785, when pirates raided an RSI convoy, a convoy that was designated from Kruger to RSI, that put their contract with RSI at risk. So they began to basically freak out and go, we don't know what to do. We can't stay in Magnus anymore. In fact, the CEO at the time had Artyom Chansiri basically said, he said, we're never leaving Magnus. We ain't leaving. Like, it was after that major raid, they were like, we got to leave. We can't stay here. It's too dangerous. So when they were looking to leave, they actually managed to snag the perfect time, because in 27,989, the Sherman in Castra had finally become open to outside businesses because of the thawing of the Cold War between the Xi'an and humans. So as the Castra system began to open up, one of the first companies to move in to Sherman was Kruger Intergalactic. And they survived the fall of the Mezzers, but the capital, their main business is in fact Sherman. Now, we don't know the full story, in fact, the actual exact time frame, but it wasn't until the 29th or the 30th century when Kruger was having a meeting. The major managers at Kruger, or I think it was maybe even the board was having a meeting to discuss stuff. And one of the members made a joke that said, you know, we make all the parts of the gun except for the gun itself. And that comment caused a stir amongst the board, and they realized, why don't we make the gun? And so that began the transformation of Kruger from a parts company to a manufacturer. Their first weapon was to replace the aging Avenger weapons, because at the time, the companies that were making the weapons that were on the Avenger had gone out of business. The only ones that would stuck around were Bearing, because most of them had been connected to the Mezzer era. So they had to replace the front of the Avenger cannon, the front gun on the Avenger cannon, or Avenger cannon on the Avenger, and Kruger came up with what they know as the Tiger Strike, a Gatling ballistic gun called the Tiger Strike, which was their first gun they had manufactured. Aegis adopted it as the standard for the front of the Avenger, and it has since become very easily accessible. Tiger Strike is a Kruger weapon. Sometime in the middle of the 29th century, I believe, RSI was going to upgrade to the Mark IV constellation, and as part of that deal, they wanted to try to spruce it up and make a reason why people would want to move from their old connies to the new connie. And Kruger leveraged its relationship with RSI and said, hey, we want to make ships. How about we make a snub ship that's specifically, bespokely designed to work with your new constellation line? And RSI said this is great, mostly because they didn't want to lose Kruger as a part manufacturer. So they allowed Kruger to develop what we know today as the P-52 Merlin and the P-72 Archimedes. Both those ships were designed specifically in tandem with RSI, so they learned a little bit from RSI's engineers and what they were making. Fast forward to last year, when Kruger came up with the first ever ship, solo ship, the L-21 and L-22 Wolf. The L-21 Wolf and the L-22 Alpha Wolf. Let's start with the Wolf over here. These ships were designed from scratch, from the very beginning, to be ships made by Kruger, sold for Kruger. Now, why a light fighter? Almost certainly because a lot of this, the knowledge of building ships comes from their light fighters, the Merlins. So they took that information and then sort of used that to build their own ships. Again, they make pretty much all the parts anyways for a lot of ships. engine cowlings, fuel lines, that kind of stuff. So it wasn't too difficult for them to find pieces or fabricate their own pieces, which is one of the reasons why it's so sleek and smooth, is that they can basically custom build anything they want. They have all of the materials to do that. It also helps that light fighters always sell, both in verse and out of verse. So the L-21 was a very easy purchase and pickup or a make for them. And they followed it up with the L-22, which is simply a different variation on the L-21, but just better. Different style in terms of its wings, doesn't have the little fin at the bottom, but I believe these are ballistic weapons, or are they laser weapons? I think they're laser weapons. Laser weapons, yeah. 2 sides for laser weapons. Then we've got the Stingray, I believe, or the Devil Ray, one of the two, which is coming out this year as well, which is likely to be a medium fighter. But we're going to see more and more Kruger ships on the market, simply because they're the new kid on the block. They've only been around for a very long time, but in terms of the manufacturer, they've only been around since the last, at most, 100 years. So that is Kruger Intergalactic. Greycat is a little bit younger, but not by much. It was originally founded in 2337 by a man by the name of Otis Broussard. Now, Otis Broussard was nicknamed Greycat by his own family because he turned gray by the time he was in his 20s. Again, I should say, can relate. My hair was gray by the time I was 25. So, but he mostly created mining equipment. So he was one of the early kind of entrepreneurs of Mars to start producing equipment beyond just needed for Mars's survival. So Greycat became sort of a small family-owned niche, but well-respected mining material manufacturer. Drills, armor, equipment, anything you needed for mining, they would produce it and sell it to you. They did okay up until 2380, and that was when Pippa, his daughter, took over control of the company. Now, Pippa, while she was the CEO, Otis remained as the what was it called? The chairman of the board. So while Pippa was nominally in control, her father was constantly looking over her shoulder and scrutinizing what she was doing. So to try to get away from her father and to try to actually make herself kind of breathe, she got permission from the board to open up a second headquarters on Croshaw, specifically because Croshaw had just been terraformed. And she was like, and UNE had just been formed. So she was like, we can take advantage of the sort of colonization fever and open up a new facility on the frontier and as our secondary headquarters. And we could do some more experimentation there. We can't do on Mars. So it was approved. And to get her to help her figure it out, she contacted a college friend by the name of Reuben Pardue. Now you have to understand about Reuben Pardue. Reuben Pardue is one of those sort of generational geniuses that is really hard to fathom. Reuben Pardue is probably one of the smartest people that has ever lived in the Star Citizen. Not only was he smart, but he was creative, he was empathetic, he was loyal, he was possibly the most perfect person who have ever lived. I'm over-exaggerating that only a little, but he was one of the first to graduate from the University of Redder. So University of Redder had only been around for a little bit when he graduated, possibly the first class of the University of Redder. And his graduate dissertation was on geohacking. And it was so impressive in terms of terraformation. It was so impressive that Titiana Terraforming contacted him to be part of their endeavor. Now, Titiana was specifically created to terraform Uriel in the Oberon system. Uriel was, and still is, the great enigma of terraforming, because it is technically in the habitable zone, but it is an ice ball. It is very, very cold. So the only way they can heat up, they could terraform it, is extensive work to try to like heat up the core of the planet to hopefully help change the atmosphere. Lots of things had been happening, but they'd been spending a lot of money to do this. And Pardue's ideas on geohacking became the main focus of their attempts to terraform. So they hired Pardue to as their head of the program to sort of mine down towards the core of the planet and then like restart the core. I mean, look at specifically what it was said. Yeah, to raise the core's temperature is basically what it was. So in the time that he was working with Tiziana Terraforming, he spent his free time sketching out ideas because he was constantly befelled by setbacks. He was like, if I just had some equipment to help me out, I'd be able to solve this. So he sketched out a bunch of different things that would help him improve his process. Came up with lots of different ideas. Until May 23rd, 2381. On May 23rd, 2381, he was supervising some mining excavations when the operations hub where he was collapsed. The mine collapsed on top of him, and it killed 37 people and injured dozens more. And he himself was trapped in the rubble. And he barely was able to make it out alive. But not without his left arm being entirely severed. They had to cut off his left arm above the elbow, and which meant that he would have gotten access to prosthetics, but he felt so responsible for the deaths of those people that he refused to get a prosthetic. And this shattered him emotionally and mentally because of what had happened. So he left the program after the failure, took full responsibility for the whole thing, blamed himself for the problems, and became effectively a sort of a wanderer. But hearing his tragic fate, Pippa, who was his friend in college, reached out to him and said, "Hey, I know you're having a rough time. Come work with me. You know, you have some experience with mining. At the very least, I could use your expertise. You're a very smart dude. I like what you did. Come and join me in Croshaw." So he did. He came to Croshaw, and while he was at Greycat, he took all of his ideas that would have made mining better and put them into production as prototypes. The first of which is the Reily armor. The armor we have today is the descendant of the very first dedicated mining armor created by Ruben Pardue himself. And it did pretty well. Lots of integrated stuff helped. Basically, the idea was to protect a miner from cave-ins. If a cave-in happened, they would survive. It wouldn't like prevent them from getting caved in, but it would protect them from dying from a cave-in. But his second invention was far more important because he created the Pyro multi-tool. The very first Pyro multi-tool was invented by Ruben Pardue. And when I say this thing was the most important like creation in the history of humanity in terms of like far-flung colonization efforts, I would be underselling it. Within a year, Greycat was unable to keep up with demand for it. So they spent half their time fighting off rivals who were basically copying the Pyro multi-tool and selling off-brand multi-tools. And it took them almost a century of just fighting in court to try to get these competitors shut down so that they could continue to produce multi-tools so they could protect their own IP. And yeah, as you can tell, the multi-tool is very important. It is the standard kit for any space faring individual in the UEE. It is standard kit for every member of the military. It is the Swiss Army knife of the Star Citizen universe. Now, from there, Greycat continued to coast off of a lot of his ideas. Probably the most famous of his ideas was the PTV, or the Personal Transport Vehicle. The original PTV had an armored roof, but was otherwise fairly open. The idea was it to be small enough to fit into most caves, to be able to transport a couple of miners and their equipment into a cave area. But if there was a cave-in, you would be able to protect a miner's head with the roof wouldn't collapse. They started producing these, we're talking years after Pardew's death. They started producing these and found the workers on the floor were using them as transport vehicles. They would literally, once they got off the floor, they would drive them up and down the factory floor to get from point A to point B because of how efficient it was and how fast and fun it was. And noticing this, the Greycat executive said, why don't we sell this as a, sell a version of this as just like a pleasure vehicle, like just something that your average person could use. So they removed the armor and the armored roof and sold it to the masses, and now we have the PTV. Since then, Greycat has been mostly known for selling its vehicles. Of course, we have the UTV recently, and the STV, which were all sort of variations on the PTV. Well, obviously, evolutions of the PTV. But right now, before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about the Greycat MDC. Now, the MDC seems like it is probably a recent development, but the M series of the MXC series of vehicles is effectively a security version of their utility vehicles. This has got a point defense turret on it for local area defense. And there's a couple different versions of it. We've got this is the MDC, and the MTC is over here. Which is a patrol vehicle. It has space for a driver, and I think there's a seat for an operator for the guns, and it's got some more stuff in the back, whereas the MDC is more of a single-person operator. There are more versions of the MXC. I don't know what the last one's called. It's not called the MXC. I think it's like the M... can't remember. It's a crafting version. So instead of this back area being a, area for habitation or weapons, it's a crafter, mobile crafter. Any reason to get an MDC over an Ursa? I think the MDC is technically more armored, and I think these are heavier guns on the top. It also is smaller. I think it fits in about the same amount of an Ursa, but I think it has bigger guns. I think I want to say the MCC, but I don't think that's the right one. This is like a mobile crafting. I think that's it for the Greycat on the floor. So let's talk about... Oh, there's the STV. Here's the STV. The STV is sort of like, as I said, it's sort of take the PTV, scale it up, and use it for more off-roading. This is actually a racing vehicle. It's used mostly for off-roading and racing. And the UTV is a more utilitarian version of the STV. The community, for those of you who don't know, calls this the Steve, because it's the STV, which is, kind of abbreviation of Steve. So if you hear people saying, I'm going to get the Steve, or hey, it's a Steve, that's this. It's the STV. MISC is a little newer. The best way to describe MISC is that MISC itself was sort of the invention of the fall of the Measures. Musashi Industrial Starflight Concern was created between the merger of the failing Hato Electronics Corporation and the Musashi Lifestyle Design Unit spinoff of Acorn Limited. Now, Acorn Limited still exists. I think they make vehicle components. But we don't know why they merged, but we do know that the whole series of ships is said to have been first made in 2803 or 2804, a couple of years before the founding of MISC. So it is likely, this is my interpretation, that the Musashi Lifestyle Design Unit came up with the whole series of ships. Now, why did they invent the whole series of ships? Well, dear viewer, several years before, the last Mezzer, Linton Mezzer, met his demise during the Anti-Mezzer Revolution. When the Anti-Mezzer Revolution was over with, many of the companies that had supported the Mezzers had disappeared, partially because they were eradicated either through revolutionary investigations or oversight, or because the owners freaked out and fled because they knew that they were going to be investigated and possibly convicted of crimes against humanity. So much of what the empire at that time was using for transportation was gone. Either parts manufacturers or ship manufacturers ceased to exist. Only a handful of ship manufacturers survived, one of which is Aegis, RSI, and others, RSI, Argo, Greycat. These companies existed, but a lot of them had either lost their government contracts, like RSI, Argo, and Greycat had at that point, or were only kept around because of the necessity of them, like Aegis, because pretty much the entire Navy was flying Aegis ships at the time. So it would have made no sense to eliminate Aegis and then have no one to make your replacement parts for your fleet. So, but Aegis had suffered significant losses as a result. Thus, between 2791 and 2800, there was a gap in terms of new ships being built specifically for things like transportation. In steps the Musashi Lifestyle Design Unit. Clearly, the engineers came up with an interesting idea, but they did not have the facilities to produce them at scale. Hato Electronics, which was failing, had the extensive network of factories that could be converted over to producing ships. So they merged together, created MISC, likely specifically to sell the whole series. And the whole series went on to become the staple upon which all trade in the verse is done by. The whole series is one of the most common series of ships in the verse, and MISC themselves came up with the Standard Crate Unit, or the SCU, which has become the standard crate design for the entire UEE. So, if you ever complain about the various sizes of SCU, the 2, 4, or the 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32, blame MISC. They're the ones who invented it. So since then, MISC went on to produce many more ships to help flesh out their brand. But MISC's main sort of approach to making manufacturing ships was to seek out a need, do extensive studies and research, and then come to a consensus, yes, this is a need that needs to be done. Then going into extensive design with committees, which each committee deciding what part they need to deal with, and then coming out with ideally the perfect ship by committee that would solve the problem that they're facing. So one of the early things that the designers at MISC realized was that there is a gigantic gap in logistics when it comes to space. This had been a problem forever. This has been a problem in the UEE since practically its founding. There just isn't a lot or enough support networks for spaceships that exists in the UEE, in terms of places you can refuel, places you can just stop and rest, places you can repair or rearm. Aegis attempted to solve this problem with the Vulcan, but the Vulcan is only but one ship, and there hasn't been a extensive refueler, a specifically designed fueler ship. There hadn't been for a while. Most of them were just converted haulers. So you can imagine like something like a Hull C being converted to dispensing fuel. Not exactly the most efficient solution. So MISC was one of the first in the modern era to create a specific ship designed to fill that role, which was the MISC Starfarer. Now, the Starfarer was an extensive success, and MISC also knew that based off of their extensive, very careful research, that the Navy also needed a specific cargo or a refueling ship. But here's the kicker. They approached the Navy and said, here is our extensive PowerPoint that explains everything we need to. I'm being facetious a little bit with the PowerPoint, but here's our expensive presentation, which explains all of the details of why you need our ship. Here is all the problems you're facing. Here's all the solutions this can solve. Here is our design for the perfect militarized version of a ship that you need. And the Navy took one look at them, said, I don't know who you are. Get out of my office. Very confused that the Navy was not going to listen to the very rational and logical arguments they were making, they decided to figure out why this was. Probably doing a couple more committees and researching, because that's how MISC works. They came up with the understanding that they don't understand military procurement, and because they don't have the connections with military procurement, they needed somebody who did. Enter Aegis Dynamics. While they were no longer in the good favor of the UE Navy, the people at Aegis knew who to talk to when it came to the military. So MISC approached Aegis, told them their ideas, and said, hey, if we work together, we can create a vehicle for the Navy, and if you can give us some design points, because you create military ships, so you can understand like what they're looking for, and we need your connections to get in. Aegis took a look at it, basically rubber stamped it, said, this sounds great, let's go. And so they walked with MISC to the Navy, pitched it out. Navy said, this is great, wonderful, we're gonna buy this ship from you, which is the creation of the Starfarer Gemini. I say all of that to get to the Starlight. The Starlight is sort of the latest evolution of that solution, but miniaturized. The idea being is to simplify and streamline the process of refueling to make it easier with a smaller footprint. One of the biggest problems that the UEE has right now, both militarily and domestically, is there's a lot of stuff that needs to be done, but there's not enough people to do it. So by simplifying the process to simply a single person instead of a whole crew, for the value of maybe a single Starfarer, you could probably get at least 2 to 3 Starlights. That's 3 people versus a crew of probably more like 5 or 6. Now, I don't think that the Starlight is capable of refining like the Starfarer is, but you don't need to refine if you're able to, if you're just refueling and then leaving. So let's go in and talk a little bit about the person go. Let's walk inside though and see a little bit about the Starlight itself to show, kind of give you an idea of what's going on. All right, so simple, easy solution. Now, one thing you'll notice right now is this is the classic mailbox slit front. Half of all MISC ships have these. The Starfarer has it, the Freelancer has it, the Starlancer has it. And of course, now the Starlight has it. Very common design. You notice that it's got suit locker, it's got engineering terminal, it's got gun racks, and it has easy access to all the components. You don't have to leave at all. Here, we've got the escape pod, which also acts as a bed, storage above it, food replicators, and as my good friend Scooter would say, the Thumper Dumper 5000 here for your hygiene needs, plus a working, look at that, a working mirror. Notice how everything in that is designed to get to accomplish what you want and what you need in a ship. Now, with MISC, let's move on to talk about the other MISC ship. Let me see if there's not another one around here, right? I don't believe there is. Let's go look at Mirai, because I think that's the only MISC ship on the floor. We'll check real quick. MISC Starlight. I think it's just down to Mirai, right? Yeah, the Mirai. All right, let's head over to Mirai. It's funny how committee constantly comes at the conclusion, mailbox slot good. If it works for one ship, why doesn't it work for all the other ones? I always like to bring up the fact that Drake and MISC also have a massive rivalry with one another. And the approach between Drake and MISC is very different. MISC is very calculated and very precise, everything done by committee. Whereas Drake is sort of, what's the vibe going on? Let's put that together. But they end up with very similar outcomes because Drake is also focused on what the people want, but they're going to do it very quickly, and they're going to use what they already have. MISC's going to use what it already has as well, but and they're also focused on what people want. But the difference is one is corporate as heck, and the other one is very seat of the pants, as it were. So, Mirai is not that much different from MISC. It is, in fact, founded off of MISC, and it is sort of the exotic brand for MISC. The example is, I believe it's Mitsubishi Heavy Industrial is the name of it. Mitsubishi has the Heavy Industrial brand, and then they have their, more other brands as well. MISC is similar to Mitsubishi High. And this specifically, the Mirai brand started off, instead of being part of MISC Heavy Industries, which is what most of the other ships like the Starfarer, the Hulls, those kind of things are all part of MISC High. All the other ships are just more of a generic, I think they call them Built for Life brand. So like the Starlight, the Freelancer, the Reliant, those are all built for life, MISC built for life. The Fury and the Guardian are part of what used to be known as MISC M, or MISC Mirai, which was originally for Mirai meaning future in Japanese. Remember, MISC is actually founded in Saisei, in the Centauri system. It's heavily influenced by Japanese culture, though it's sort of a mishmash of various different cultures, though mostly Japanese. So, the first MISC M ship was known as the Daedalus, because the CEO at the time, Corey Desmond of MISC, was a huge racing fan. I mean, massive racing fan. So he wanted MISC to create a ship that would specifically win the Murray Cup. However, at the time, they lacked the expertise and the technology to really build racing ships. So the first ship they built, the Daedalus, was a disaster and barely got off the ground and didn't win many races. However, that team continued to stick around. And when MISC managed to get a hold of a very lucrative contract with the Xi'an Empire, specifically Aopoa, they managed to, early on, before most of the trade agreements had been signed, this is a whole thing to understand. House Gatak and the Gatak brand went to Aopoa and said, hey, we know that MISC wants better efficiency in terms of engines and better maneuverability in terms of engines because of MISC M. You have both of those things, and we want the plans for the whole series because we want to see how efficient the whole series is. So they had Aopoa reach out to MISC so that they could do a technology swap. In exchange for Xi'an technology when it came to their multi-thrust vectoring technology and their efficient engines, MISC would give the full rights for the Xi'an Empire to produce their own version of the whole series of ships. Now, it's likely that this trade was specifically spurred on to the creation of the I'm always going to forget the name of it. I always mess up the name anyways. The Reily? I don't know how to say it properly. The Reily. The Reily is sort of the Xi'an took a look at the design specs for Hull and went, what if we made our own version of the Hull? So that's sort of the Reily is the direct result of this technology exchange. But now that MISC had access to engineers and schematics for engines that Aopoa would create, MISC decided to take another crack at their Daedalus project, creating the MISC Razor. The Razor became very, very good at racing. It used a lot of the technology for engine thrusters and such. And because it became so good at what it did, they decided to spin off that brand into its own brand in the 2940s called Mirai. So Mirai is now a standalone brand owned under the MISC umbrella, but it is its own separate brand that heavily uses Xi'an technology. After the Razor, they came out with the Fury, which is fairly recent. This is a snub ship designed to fit in pretty much anything you can put it in to be a force multiplier, especially for industrial ships that might be in dangerous locations. Having a bunch of these is a great sort of counter to any pirates that might show up if you don't have mercenaries to call upon. This is the MX version of the Fury, which replaces all of the guns for missiles. The next, they stepped it up to creating the Guardian. The Guardian is a heavy fighter, utilizing all of the things that they had learned from the Xi'an, plus everything they had learned from manufacturing ships themselves. So it is very maneuverable, but it is very big and can hit very hard. This is sort of, at the moment, the pinnacle of that technology exchange. A true human Xi'an hybrid when it comes to designs. This ball cockpit here that you see here is the epitome of the Aopoa design when it comes to cockpit design. The Kar2Al and the Santok Yai both have this cockpit design as part of their design. This is unique to the Mirai brand, stealing similar things. And here in the back, you can see really the engines. Notice how these engines are sort of on a swivel. These engines can also act as maneuvering thrusters if angled properly. So this is taking the idea of a Xi'an ship, but then compacting it into a human-sized platform, because usually Xi'an ships are very vertical, human ships are very lateral. So I think lateral is the right term. Horizontal, I guess. And so this is sort of that fusion. For those of you who are Mass Effect fans, this is like the original Normandy of Turian human design meshed into one. This is that right now epitome of that. Let's go over Aegis Dynamics. Pretty short one because there's only got one ship on the floor, but before we do that, let's talk a little bit about the history. Aegis Dynamics was founded in 2532, and it was founded between a merger between Earth-based Aegis macrocomputing and Davian-based dynamic production systems. Its explicit goal was to make naval spacecraft. It's important to remember that at the time it was founding in 2532, the United Planets of Earth, I think by then, was undergoing a rapid shift in modernization of its navy. It seems like much of the navy and military forces of humanity had sort of laid stagnant after the unification wars. And with the first contact with the Banu, rapidly changed people's opinions on what was needed. So the first thing they did was sort of develop the small and medium-sized defense contractors they already had. And the next was to sort of expand the Navy with ships that they could utilize more efficiently for both defense of the home front and a potential invasion by an alien force. So, Aegis Dynamics itself was founded explicitly to take advantage of this change. And as a result, ended up sort of through dumb luck and clever work, ended up becoming the main manufacturer of military ships for the UEE Navy for centuries. Mostly because of their close personal relationship with Ivar Messer and then eventually his descendants. So, what happened was that Aegis, once it had been formed, took a unique approach to military procurement. Instead of just building whatever the Navy or the military had asked them to do, they would first figure out, once the Navy had set up a kind of a bid for a contract, they would reach out to the current operators of similar vehicles in the Navy to figure out what they wanted to do, what they wanted to change. Let me see if I can find... I think it's the Roto, his original name. Yeah. Yeah, I can't find it. But they started with, as far as we know, their first real ship that they created was the Aegis Retaliator. Built in the middle of the Tevarin War, Aegis was eager to get a new contract and had interviewed bomber pilots of the current working bomber spacecraft that the UEE had created. That bomber spacecraft was not very well liked and it was aging. So when Aegis set about to talk with them to see what they wanted, they basically built a bomber exactly to what these pilots and bomber crews wanted in a bomber, plus what the UEE required them for, or UPE at the time required them for. It also helped that when they built the Retaliator, it was the first ship to really take advantage of a miniaturized energy shield. Throughout much of the Tevarin War, a major sort of problem that was occurring with humanity's forces was that we had energy shields, but they only worked on the largest ships that humanity had because they required an immense amount of power. The Tevarin had been able to miniaturize this tech and put it into anything as small as a Talon. So humanity was at a huge disadvantage. But when the Retaliator was built in 2944, it proved to be an exceptionally good ship at dealing with the things that the Tevarin would throw at it. And it's likely because this ship was one of the first human ships of its size to have an energy shield, probably reverse engineered from Tevarin technology. Now, this was important because the bomber would be used heavily during the invasion of Idris IV. where Ivar Messer would call in retaliator strikes against the targets as closely as possible to try to keep the heat off of the Tavaran attacking, effectively calling danger close, aka on their own position, airstrikes. The constant rain of bombs from the retaliator crews as they would make their way over to relieve the attack effectively kept the Tavaran away from the position that humanity had managed to gather during the invasion, the small foothold they were able to gather. And Ivar Messer was so impressed with the performance of the retaliator that he reached out to Aegis after the conflict, or after the battle, and personally thanked them and began a close working relationship with Ivar Messer as he rose to power after the war to become the first Imperator and found the United Empire of Earth. Him and his descendants were all heavily linked with Aegis. So Aegis effectively became a wing of the Messer power structure. As a result, pretty much all ships in the UEE Navy were produced by Aegis. There were a handful. RSI still produced ships, and of course, there was the Hurricane for the Second Tavaran War, which was produced by Case Aerospace. But if it was a ship, especially a large ship, in the Navy, it was probably an Aegis ship. That would change in... on the actual date. That would change under Hannah Chan. CEO Hannah Chan changed things. She was CEO from 2643 to 2708. And when she greenlit what she called the second wave of ships from Aegis Dynamics, what that really meant was that she began to build new generations of ships specifically in response to the Vanduul. This second wave of ships was marked by the Javelin being the main ship that kind of spearheaded it, but would end up becoming the impetus for the Avenger, for the Vanguard. Trying to think of what else, other ships at the time. Mostly those three, as far as we know. It's also the Aegis at this time period during the second wave that standardized diamond laminate for cockpits. Now, after the fall of the Messers in 2791, Aegis was a bit on the downslope. They had obviously backed the wrong side and were in risk of being destroyed altogether. But luckily for them, because so many ships were made by them that effectively formed the entire vanguard of the UEE fleet, the UEE couldn't afford to kick out Aegis. So they simply stripped them of future projects and forced them to maintain and build the current generation of ships as they found replacements in manufacturers like Anvil, RSI, MISC. I'm trying to think about the other major ships that would come out. Kruger, the new wave of ship manufacturers that started to come around towards the beginning of the 29th century, 2800s. This meant that they lost a lot of money and were on the edge of bankruptcy when an old Retaliator version was proved to be very, very lucrative. See if I can find the name of it. No, I can't find it in my notes. But there was a specific generation of Retaliators which was seen very popular with ship customizers. And Aegis began to see large numbers of this specific year of Retaliator, get a ton of custom work done as they started to retire older ships from the fleet. This gave Aegis an idea, and they started to sell
their backlog of ships directly to the public because they were no longer under contract to only produce for the military. The public jumped at the chance to buy Aegis Dynamics ships because they saw them as being incredibly cool and good. They were very, very important for the overall Navy at the time. So, or the Navy, but they were seen as very effective for what they did, which is one of the reasons why people started buying them in bulk, because they would rather buy them directly from Aegis rather than from some scrapyard or from some other third-party retailer that was selling effectively stripped-down versions of the ship that they would have to rebuild themselves. This saved Aegis, and Aegis began to, from then on, produce ships exclusively for the civilian market that they would then sell to the military. The pinnacle of this was the Saber. The Saber was produced many years after Aegis's sort of falling out with the UEE. And at that time, Aegis had sort of worked in its good graces back with the UEE and was producing new and updated ships for them. But before the UEE even accepted the Saber as a UEE Navy ship, the Aegis, once they announced it, sold a version to the public right away. And this sort of tactic eventually inspired Anvil to do the same idea, where they had a military version and a civilian version. It's one of the things that drove Drake to produce ships for the private sector, because they saw how effective Aegis was doing it. So Aegis was really the trendsetter in a lot of different things that had happened in ship development and ship sales throughout its entire life. It's still around today, and it's still fairly powerful. And to illustrate that fact, let's talk about this behemoth right here, the Tiburon. Now, the Tiburon is the ancestor of what's known as as Project Monitor. Now, Project Monitor was a goal to replace an old fleet screen, a patrol ship called the Gwyn class. Now, the Gwyn class was a modified cargo hauler to serve as a fighter screen. When a Project Monitor was announced in the 2765, Aegis got a no bid contract. This is still under the measures, and they quickly developed 3 different prototypes for the ship. The most well-known prototype was what we now know as the Hammerhead. But what we may not know is that one of the prototypes actually made it all the way to funding, to the funding process for, or to like, I guess, wind tunnel, quantum tunnel development. In that quantum tunnel development, up on this ship, I don't know if I can. It failed during its quantum testing. This one's busted. So no on board. That one that was that failed in quantum testing was developed by one Jude Harris Arnold. And for those of you who don't know who Jude Harris Arnold is, Jude Harris Arnold was the man who would go on to found Anvil Aerospace. It was his experience working on Project Monitor and his prototype, because he helped develop and design one of the prototypes of the Hammerheads, that drove him to creating Anvil Aerospace, because he had such a poor experience working within Aegis itself. So it's thanks to the Hammerhead that we have Anvil. Funny. Now, we don't know where the Tiburon comes from. It's likely a new ship. I wouldn't be surprised if the laser that's built into the spinal mount of the, or the top mount of the Tiburon here, the size 10, is quite literally just the version, the same type of laser that the Aegis Dynamics laser that's on the Idris, another Aegis ship. But secretly,
I would like to believe that the Tiburon is sort of a descendant of that original failed concept of a hammerhead by Jude Harris Arnold, with the anti-turrets, anti-fighter turrets swapped out for some more heavy hits. That's just my own headcanon. We don't know how old this thing is, though it's probably fairly new. But this is a great example of Aegis as well. This is being sold to the public before it's being sold to the Navy. It is a gunship. It is designed as a gunship. It's designed to sort of be the more glass cannon equivalent to the Perseus, though it's much more reliant on fighter screens than even the Perseus is. It is these guns are, I believe, size 7 bespokes, so you can't swap them out. But and they're each controlled by a lone operator, and then the pilot controls the size 10 cannon on the front, or size 10 laser on the front. I've said this in the past, but the main reason why these ships are being developed, especially from the military and defense perspective, is manpower. Manpower is short in the UEE, so it is far more important that you can get your biggest bang for your buck, where you can have a ship like the Tiburon, which cuts down the crew requirements of a hammerhead, which has 8 people required, and I think reasonably it's more like 6 or 7, down to 5, which is a huge reduction in force to be an effective team. Crusader Industries was founded in 2799 by anti-Mezer political activist August Dunlo, or August Dunlo. I like to say August Dunlo because it makes so many Germans mad. August Dunlo, resident of Croshaw, came from Croshaw. Whole parents were killed by Linton Mezer's coup to kill his father and take over the empire. And then Dunlo dedicated his life to overthrowing the Mezers and succeeded. He has a long, interesting life. I did an entire video on just August Dunlo's story and the story of Crusader Industries already, so you can check that out if you need to. But the brief idea is, in 2799, he took over a shuttle system, a shuttle manufacturer called Seraphim Systems. His reason for doing this was specifically because he worked in the government after the revolution, thinking he could bring about change through government action. And he discovered fairly quickly that that is not how you make change in government action. In fact, the biggest people who had the most influence in the government were corporations. So he needed to found his own corporation. Now, luckily for him, he was also a very, very talented businessman, and had managed to acquire a business degree when he was in college. Despite being an orphan, he ended up climbing out of poverty, getting a degree, getting a scholarship and a degree. He's a very talented and very smart man. He took this struggling shuttle manufacturer, and managed to convince the owner and CEO, the founder and CEO, to sell to him. Despite her hesitancy, because she was a very religious person, very Christian, which is why she named her company Seraphim Systems. And over a long amount of negotiation between her and August Dunlo, she agreed to sell, and he agreed to change the name to Crusader to sort of keep some of those religious connotations there. Especially, she was especially impressed because what he explained what he wanted to do was not necessarily run a shuttle manufacturer for profit,
But what he wanted to do was run the shuttle manufacturer and then turn that shuttle manufacturer into a profitable business and use the profits from that shuttle manufacturer for good, for charities and stuff like that. I always forget the name, the term for it. So using his influence and connections within the government, because he had worked in the government, he managed to land a couple of contracts, and by the early 2800s, he had managed to drag the company from being barely scraping by shuttle manufacturer to a rising star. One of the first ships that he built was a ship called the Crusader. I'm blanking on the name of this one. Jupiter. The Jupiter was their first ship, and I cannot underscore how massive the Jupiter was for being their first ship. It was effectively their solution to the cargo crisis, because it was very difficult to get secure transport for their shuttles. They basically came up with the idea to build their own shuttle transporting ship. So they did, and it was massive, huge ship to be able to transport these shuttles to market. And once they had transported the shuttles to market, it got a lot of attention for how big it was and how efficient it was. So they started to sell the Jupiter along with these shuttles. And one of the first customers for the Jupiter was the UEE military, who explicitly used the Jupiter for humanitarian missions. The idea was it was so big, it could hold so many things, that if there was a crisis somewhere, not only could the Jupiter be loaded up with goods to go help out the local population, goods or equipment, but it could also have large numbers of troops deploy with it as well. That's how big it was. So by 2846, or within this first couple of years of operations, Dunlow managed to finally get the entirety, like the majority of their profits being donated specifically to, oh wow, did not expect that. August Dunlow stepped down from his position in 2846. Several CEOs succeeded him over the course of several years. Most of them didn't do so well. It wasn't until 2863 when Kelly Kaplan took over. Now, it's important to understand, Kelly Kaplan is still the CEO of Crusader. She was born a year before, I think 2845, I think is when she was born. So she was born a year before Dunlow's retirement, though she may have been born earlier. Let me double check. Yeah, 2845. So she was born in 2845. And then a year later, August Dunlow stepped down. The one thing she was able to do was she helped create the Genesis Starliner. And it was her design aims of the Genesis Starliner, what's called the roll and go technique. The roll and go technique that she created was fundamentally transformative, because it allowed for multiple variations on a single hull, multiple variants to be built on the same assembly line. So you could have a specialized ship that's built for a specific role, and that could be built alongside more generic Starliners. That meant that not only could you order specialized ships alongside generalized ships, but all of those ships would share the same parts. So the Crusader, as a result, cornered the market when it came to transportation, people transportation. For a long time, in the mid to late 29th century, Genesis Starliners were so ubiquitous that it was said that when you many people would use the term "going on crusade" as a euphemism for vacation, because you would just go on the Crusader. So many people like Starliners Starlining companies purchased Crusader Starliners exclusively, and it's because of Kelly Kaplan. It's because of her in ingenuity. And remember, this was shortly after she was an intern while in graduate school. Like, she did this, I think she did this as an intern when she was working on the team, which got her hired onto the team. And so she kept working at Crusader for a long time, and then eventually got tapped to be the CEO in 2865. She was the one who was, or 2863, 62. 2 to 3 years later, in 2865, she was had the opportunity to purchase the Crusader planet, which she did, and moved all of the company's production to Orison, and expanded Orison dramatically to beyond the initial station that was built there by the UE Navy, to the huge floating city it is now. It's all of her. Now, what sits in front of us is an interesting story. This story of this ship stems from another ship that Kelly Kaplan directly invented. So, the Spirit series came out in 2906. One of the problems that that Kelly Kaplan had was, as she was getting older, towards she had been running the company for 40 years. She was in her 60s or 70s by that point. She was losing the spark and the desire to do the job, and so she was thinking about retiring. However, there was this same design that she kept coming to her, she constantly sketched out. Being a ship designer and by trade and by training, she constantly tried to get this done, but she could never have the time or the energy to build it. So she tapped another creator, another woman in the company named Gabjia Jung. And Jung was known as the Angel of Death, because her job in Crusader was to go into programs that were failing and scrap them. Basically, figure out what was good enough to save and pull. So when she walked into your department, you knew you already were dead. Your job was probably gone, and your project was probably over, because she was there to salvage it. So nobody liked her in the company. But Kelly Kaplan loved her. She thought that she was very practical and pragmatic, and she was very good, would not take any BS. Get on, wait, bud. So as a result, she tapped her to build this idea that she had in her head, which would become the Spirit. It used an old Seraphim Systems shuttle. It was called the Ascension Shuttle, because the limiting factor that Kaplan put on Jung was that she could not use anything. She couldn't build it from scratch. She had to use existing parts they already had to build this idea. So she took the Ascension Shuttle and then sort of modified it to create a personal transport craft for Kelly Kaplan, which became known as the Executive One, or the E1. It was her personal shuttlecraft, or personal ship, because it wasn't just shuttlecraft. She would take it everywhere. She would fly it herself. Kelly Kaplan fly it herself. It was, she loved it. It was her signature. But they never actually got to creating the
taking that ship and turning it into an actual ship that was to be sold on the market. But in the late 2930s, Crusader was reaching a problem where like they needed a new product, their sales were dropping, so they needed a new idea. And Kaplan pitched to the board and to the engineers of Crusader, being like, why don't we take the E1 and actually turn it into a functional commercial ship, a ship we could sell to the market? And so they started to work on this ship. The first one they created was the C1 that we know of. But they also had an interesting idea for a combat version. Now, the combat version put a big cannon onto the exterior of the ship to make it function, but they couldn't get it to work quite right. So they scrapped the idea. But Bearing Applied, I think is the Bearing Applied, heard about these experiments and approached Crusader saying, we heard you were trying to build basically a flying weapons platform. How about we give you a bespoke weapon? They had built a bespoke weapon that specifically was, they were looking for basically a platform for it. Look at the actual name of it. The F7 or the SF7 series. There's the SF7E and the SF7B, the energy and ballistic weapons. This right here is the Inferno, so this is the B variant. And taking the original frame and work of the Spirit combat ship, they reworked the frame with a new lighter weight hull and to accommodate the gun. And now you have the Ares Starfighter. Now the Ares Starfighter, especially the Inferno, comes with, how many missiles are on this bad boy? I know there's 8. 8 size 3s. And 12 size 3s on top of that. Where are the other missiles coming from? It has specific armor, unique to, especially the Ares has some, the Inferno has some specific armor that's unique to it to help protect it. It is a single seat fighter ship, but it's basically a ship built around the gun. It was built around this weapon right here and how it functions. The other thing to understand about the Ares is that the Ares is sort of next generation of ships from Crusader. Pretty much all of the newer ships that Crusader has built have been based off of the Spirit series. Kelly Kaplan loves her baby and she wants to spread her baby everywhere. This is literally a variant of the Spirit. Yeah, this is clearly the A10 of Star Citizen. But on top of that, the Intrepid also uses similar design cues, and so does, to a lesser degree, well, I guess it's the Crusader, it's the Spirit, the Intrepid, the Ares, and there's some of this is taken also from the Star Runner, but Star Runner's older. Yeah, this is actually one of the only intentionally offensive, and I don't mean offensive, like an actual like combat ship that Crusader makes. They also make the Hercules series, and they do have a version of the Hercules, which is a combat ship known as the A2. It's a gunship with bombs, but it's sort of a modification of the M2. It's a switch up. This ship, from its inception, was a combat ship. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's no bones about this. This thing was a combat ship from its inception. So this is the first pure combat ship that Crusader ever made. Because, like I said, most of their money goes to charity, like the vast majority of their profits. So most of their focus has been on logistics, transportation, that sort of thing. They're very much into support the good of the world. But they've also realized recently that sometimes the good of the world means that you're going to have to drop some bombs on people or shoot them with a very big cannon. And there is sort of a change that's happening because of that. There's definitely, Kaplan's definitely a little bit more willing to push the boundaries than Dunlow or her successors, like successors and Dunlow, were willing to do. Not to mention, but it's important to mention that Dunlow also was part of a violent revolution to overthrow a dictatorship. So he understood violence was sometimes the answer. All right, I'm going to summarize this pretty briefly because Tumbril, I'm going to do a complete history of Tumbril at some point, and I've already done a little bit about them. Tumbril Land Systems is a unique manufacturer because it is the last car manufacturer of the verse. There are no other dedicated car manufacturers. This is dedicated to ground vehicle construction. It is also one of the best in the history of the UEE. Now, it was founded by a husband and wife team who were brought together because of an older land vehicle that the wife's parents were using, because the wife's parents were caretakers to a research base on a planet called Yar in the Centauri system. It's close to Saisei. The system itself, or the outpost itself, was owned by the University of Saisei. She grew up there. She basically grew up on Yar and saw a bunch of rotating groups of researchers come by. One year, a researcher came by with her son. And that researcher, the son and the daughter are about the same age. So they got really close together, began to hang out with each other. And when the researcher herself failed to check in, the father of the girl took the boy and the girl out with that off-road vehicle to find her, and found her unconscious, found the researcher unconscious, being buried by sand, and saved her from a sandstorm that was coming. And that experience brought them even closer together. So they ended up becoming a couple, returning to Saisei. Both of them went to the University of Saisei. He went there for business. She went there for engineering. They both got very plush jobs in Saisei, in Fujin City. And they felt completely, after getting married, they felt completely hollow. They're like, we're very successful, but we don't feel like we're doing anything. So they returned to the research space because her parents were dying. And so they were there to settle the affairs, to help them pass and settle the affairs of them. But because while they were there, they found the old vehicle that had brought them together and decided what they should do is take their love of vehicles and their combined restlessness and do something crazy. So they quit their jobs, became caretakers of the old station that they both grew up in, and then went about designing and building a brand new land vehicle that they called the DX-20. And it didn't sell at all. It absolutely tanked. And the reason why the name Tumbril comes from was because there was an old two-wheeled cart that they had to salvage for parts to build the first DX-20 prototype. However, because they were supported by the university, because the university saw some value in it, they were able to make a meager living. However, with the outbreak of the First Avaran War, not so pretty closely after the founding, the UEE army realized you cannot win a battle with spaceships alone, and ground troops would like some transportation and possibly some heavy weapons to protect them, which they didn't have because they were so focused on space exploration. So they gathered all of the ground vehicles they could find that were still in production or could be found to test them. And they discovered the DX-20 beat all of them soundly. Like, it was not even a contest. The DX-20 was the best that they'd ever seen, and it required very minimal modifications
some armor, and some weapons to make it very, very good. And it was super easy for them to produce. With these, the fact that the production facilities were in Saisei, which is on the front lines of the Tevarin War at this point, it was an easy win to be able to get them to be produced and then shipped directly to the front lines. There wasn't a lot of logistics to get them to where they needed to go. Thus, the DX-20 became legendary. And because it became so legendary, everyone loved it. Every soldier that had a chance to drive one or ride in one loved it. After the war ended, everyone wanted to buy a DX-20. So sales skyrocketed. They continued to build other vehicles for different purposes. And eventually, in the 2600s, they built 2 other ships vehicles because the DX-20 was getting old. So by the time you had the second Tevarin War roll around, they needed something that was a little bit tougher, a little bit better. So they built the main battle tank, which is the Nova main battle tank, and the light tank known as the Storm, for different purposes. Specifically, Storm was built in 2606. Now, they did a fantastic job. Eventually, the two founders retired, handed over the reins, and Tumbril went from strength to strength to strength to strength. But they lost their contracts through the end of the second Tevar, or through the end of the Messer era. And even though they lost their military contracts, they thought, well, we could still push it. We could still do this with our civilian vehicles. But the problem is that all of their civilian ships, vehicles that they released, all failed. And as a result, they were left with little choice but by 2862 to sell the company for parts. So Tumbril shut down in 2862. But in 2945, a new CEO purchased them. Let me see what the actual name is. He was a huge fan of the original Tumbril brand. Terrence Naban. So he used a company called Devco Group and other investors and bought the rights to the brand and its manufacturing, and immediately went back to building newer updated versions of the old vehicles, which is why we have them today. It's not clear exactly how many of these vehicles are new. Like, for instance, we don't know if the Ranger is new or if it's one of the older vehicles, but everything we see in front of us here are all older Tumbril vehicles. So let's start off with the granddaddy of all Tumbril vehicles. You know it as the Cyclone, aka the DX-20. The DX-20, which is its military name is the Cyclone, was created in 2537. Was first updated for combat in 2545, and became vital equipment used in the military campaign against the Tevarin. It really got its name for the first Battle of the Argonne Chain, where a hastily equipped UPE army unit operating several versions of armed Cyclones found themselves in the mountains overlooking a significantly stronger Tevarin tank division, which was moving towards them. Thus, they had to figure out a way to defeat a tank division with light scout vehicles. And their solution was pure insanity. They had a couple of anti-aircraft equipped
Cyclones, which they turned into modified rocket artillery, and then used vehicles like this one to charge down the hill once the Tavarans had been scattered because of the artillery barrage, and literally weave under the gun depressions of the Tavaran tanks and take out their take them out, like knock them out. The lightning fast strike by these Cyclones saved the day and scattered the Tavaran, leaving many of them to even abandon their vehicles entirely, which allowed for humanity to get its first look at some Tavaran technology. This strategy was done by Colonel A.J. Crate. And this was the thing that really one of the first victories against the Tavaran in the war. And it sealed the Cyclone's reputation as being this insane buggy that can do anything you ask it to. And effectively gave it the legendary status it had throughout the First Tavaran War. This version itself, which one is this one? This is the MT. So this is a modified version of the military version. It has size 3 missiles, I think. So there's massive missiles on the top, or size 2. And this is a size 1 ballistic cannon on the top as well. So it seats 3, driver, passenger, and gunner. There are different versions of this one. The basic version has a driver and passenger with a 1 SU cargo box in the back, or able to hold the 1 SU cargo box in the back. There's the TR, which is another military version, but it has a chain or a Gatling gun on top. Size 2 missiles, okay, for the TR. There's the RC, which I think is the racing version, which is the one you most see on things like the Mirai. And then there's the, oh gosh, I always forget, there's the Recon version, which has the like a mechanism inside of it to deploy probes and scan. And lastly, there's the AA version, the Tumbril, the Cyclone AA, which has a EMP on it and multiple rockets. All right, from that, we go to the Nova. Now, the Nova itself is a result of the Second Tavaran War. The Cyclone was good, but they needed something that was harder, heavier, something that could take on the more advanced Tavaran forces. So they developed the Nova from scratch. Its most famous action came from the Battle of Corin Pass. Now, this was where a small patrol of Novas was going out for effectively a shakedown run. They had just been repaired, and so their commander had ordered them to sort of run as a unit to, patrol an area, but basically to just make sure that everything was working. And during this routine patrol, they got to Corin Pass, and they stumbled upon a massive hidden force of Tavaran who had secretly been gathering in this mountain pass to invade the planet. So they quickly sent someone to go, one person to return back to let the rest of the defense forces know what's going on, because the Tavaran quickly jammed their signals, and the remaining tanks, I think 3 tanks, backed up into a hard corner, and effectively held off the approaching Tavaran for 12 hours. And the Battle of Corin Pass became one of those propaganda victories that's been turned into movies and all sorts of things, of this sort of last stand of these Nova tanks. And by the time the reinforcements arrived, the Tavaran had been thoroughly beaten down, and when the human reinforcements arrived, the Tavaran fled. It's just too much at that point. Now, so the Nova, its secret is Hurston. That is the Slayer cannon. This is a bespoke size 5, I think, cannon that
hits like a size 7, made by Aegis Dynamics. This thing is like getting punched in the face with a nuke. It is very, very good at what it does and has been made by Aegis Dynamics for the Nova when it was originally built in the first place. The other thing about the Nova is that it has a shield generator, which not a lot of vehicles do have. It's got a crew of 3, headspace you can walk around. It's got cargo, and it's got most of its equipment inside. A driver, a commander, and a gunner for the turret. I think it's driver, co-driver, and commander, but I think the commander controls the turret itself. The co-driver or commander possibly actually has the control of the top turret, the top auxiliary turrets. Plus, it's also got some missiles on board for additional range if need be. Now, this is probably one of the most controversial vehicles in Star Citizen because one of the few things that you can do, few things you can do to make the internet angry beyond getting a weapon wrong in a video game is getting a tank wrong. And so many people hate this thing because it's like, it's huge and it's got terrible depression in terms of its guns and everything like that, which is mostly true because CIG's never made a tank before. But the other thing to remember is that this is a vehicle with an energy shield, so it's a lot more survivable than your average tank. And there's also some game requirements. The reason why you can stand up and walk around inside of it is because you need to have the ability for NPCs to be able to stand up and walk around inside the vehicle. So some of the perspectives, some of the sizes of vehicles, especially vehicles in Star Citizen, are wonky because of that requirement. Because it's not just like tap E to enter vehicle. Yes, the driver can operate the turret, but I don't think you can aim with the turret. Yeah, it's a technical limitation. And I also think, if you think about its lore, the fact that this is the first tank that Tumbril ever built, and humanity hadn't really built tanks for hundreds and hundreds of years, it kind of makes sense that you'd build something like this, something big and tough and with a big gun, but like not thinking about the downward depression angle of your guns and having nothing to protect you. It is very much a tank, though. It does still require infantry support to keep you alive, so. You don't really need deflection tanks, deflection plates when you have an energy shield that can deflect incoming fire. And then we've got the Storm, probably the most controversial of the vehicles. This is technically a light tank. It was designed during this Second Tavaran War to slip behind Tavaran lines and attack artillery. It's sort of a scout tank and a light tank, though it is massive for a tank. It has the same dimensions as the Nova in terms of its foot. It's just its height is shorter, and its main gun pops up in the top. This is the AA version where they replaced the main gun with rocket pods. The Storm AA is probably the more reasonable one because it's definitely used as both a rocket artillery as well as an anti-aircraft platform, and it's probably more of a backliner rather than a frontliner. But it's so maneuverable, you can get around it. So sort of like a mobile artillery piece. So the heavy scout tank, yeah. So no really stories about this one other than it was built around the same time as the Nova. So for the same conflict. And it has been brought back like the Nova and the Cyclone specifically because of the need for more ground vehicles to deal with the Tavaran invasions, or the Vanduul invasions. I forgot to mention that the Nova also has a famous event where during the first testing of the Crusader M2, a small squadron, I guess, of Novas came alongside a small contingent of Marines to attack a pirate base that had been identified, and it was so effective because the pirates weren't expecting the ability to deploy Nova tanks to their base. Most of them surrendered without a fight simply because it was just were not expecting this massive thing to roll up to their front door. So that's one of the reasons why Crusader and Tumbril work really well together, because Crusader built their vehicles, or their transport vehicles, around Tumbril. Effectively, they use Tumbril as the measurements for all of their vehicles. So, like the M2 can fit a Nova, which means it can fit a Storm or a Cyclone, or pretty much anything else, because the Nova is the largest vehicle in the UE arsenal in terms of ground vehicle, in terms of height and size. So yeah. So if you notice in the Crusader Hercules commercial, they say like they work closely with other groups, and they showed like this thing rolling off the front, and that's because Crusader and Tumbril have a long working relationship with each other, which is why it makes sense that it's both of their days together, because they work hand in hand and have been since the 29th century, and then their rekindled relationship with the 30th century. All right, Anvil Aerospace. Now, to understand Anvil Aerospace, we have to understand a completely separate company that doesn't exist anymore. Case Aerospace. Founded by Leonard Case in 2623, Case was an interesting character. He was a designer at RSI. He worked on the RSI Starbright. His rise through the ranks at RSI had a lot to do with his own direct sense, his own personal sense of responsibility, of I don't want to say honor. Honor is not the right word. He was very responsible. He had a sense of duty to what he was doing. And while he was working as a somewhat junior designer on the RSI Starbright, which was supposed to release in like 2555, he pointed out there were several design flaws which would cause significant problems with the ship when it would release. And his immediate higher-ups said, "It's not a problem, shut up, don't tell anybody else about this." So that concerned him, so he went above their heads to the higher execs at RSI, and the higher execs at RSI said, "This is a significant problem. It could cause significant issues, including damage to our reputation, damage to the ship, damage to individuals, and opens up the lawsuits. Thank you for pointing this out." They went down, they fired the people who told them to shut up about it, and they hired him to replace them. So being the head of the Starbright team, he at first said, "We need to fix all these problems." So he went in to fix all these problems, but that would have caused a delay. The higher-up admin, hated him for doing that. The people who just gave him the job did not like the fact that he was delaying this anticipated release to 2600. So the new 2600 Starbright was scheduled to come out, but he had to fight the red tape and bureaucracy of RSI the entire way to make the ship the way he wanted to do. Now, the Starbright series up to this point was sort of like a personal luxury craft, a mini yacht for one person. And Case envisioned not a mini yacht for one person that's just about luxury, but it's about simplicity, so that people could enjoy it and easily learn how to fly it. So what he created was the benchmark, which RSI would eventually use to create the Aurora. So this is sort of like a prototype Aurora. And once he released the Starbright, which should have been the magnum opus of his career, this big moment for him, he instead quit. It was released, he got it on his CV, and he clocked out. He took what the money he had and left, because he was so tired of the bureaucracy where you had to have like a certain level of seniority to have say. So he went off and founded Case Aerospace, his own company, and created his own sort of version of a like a pleasure yacht called the Cosmos Sloop. And the idea of his company was that I guess I don't think the term is like leveled. There's a term for it, but effectively they would do meetings where even the lowliest employee could speak up and ask questions or have their concerns about a specific product at any time, and they had to be listened to. And that meant that more people had buy-in for doing stuff, and often it didn't allow for like seniority to take things over with. Stakeholders, I guess, but it was more like everyone was even when it came to specific aspects. Like you had your specialty, but everyone was even. And it worked really well for the Cosmos Sloop. The problem was the Cosmos Sloop was released in 2604. Yeah, because I don't know why it says 2623. That doesn't make any sense. That's when he died, I think. Maybe it was. Oh, because it was bought by an investment term in 2623. Okay, that's version. My notes are wrong. So he left in like 2602 and created Case Aerospace. Released it in 2604, the Cosmos Sloop. It did well, but the problem was he released it at the very beginning of the Second Tavaran War, so there wasn't a lot of call for personal spacecraft. So Case Aerospace was in trouble. They weren't making enough money. Their first ship did okay, but not good enough in sales. And in the middle of the war, there was a call because basically the UE was desperate for anything to combat the reemergence of the Tavaran plus their phalanx shields. So Case said, I've never done a military craft, but let's take a look at it. So he started to study what was available in terms of information about the Tavaran. And what he came up with was he realized that the Tavaran used a two-person technique for their medium-heavy fighter, which was codenamed by the UEE the Jackal. Now, the Jackal heavy fighter was a unique design where instead of having the pilot and a gunner, you had a pilot and an engineer. And the second person on the Jackal job was to physically aim the shields to effectively block incoming fire, rerouting power. They were effectively, like I said, like an engineer. Their job was to let the pilot focus on flying and firing, while the secondary person like sort of kept them going. And he took a look at that and he expanded it and eventually reached a point where he created what is sort of the evil twin to the Jackal, what we know today as the Hurricane. And the Case Hurricane was built on the idea of, because the shields, the phalanx shields that the Tavaran used had to be physically pointed, that if you attacked a target from too many angles, the person would be overwhelmed who's trying to maneuver shields. So it was basically speed and firepower which was what you needed. So the Hurricane was introduced as a hard counter to the Tavaran, and it worked really well. But it took a lot of training and practice for the UE pilots to figure out how to use it. Because effectively, you'd have the pilots fly in, do a strafe run, while the gunners in the turret would like pre-aim their weapons for the pass so that they could attack the target at a different angle. And you would have multiple Hurricanes would dive in on a target at different angles, so that when they were turning, they would be exposing all of the sides of the target they're attacking. And because of just the sheer volume of firepower they were dropping into these ships, it would damage or completely destroy the ship before the engineer had a chance to respond to it. So it did. As a result, it took a relatively few amount of Hurricanes to take on
similar numbers of Tavaran ships to completely overwhelm them. Even though it was introduced very late into the war, it did exceedingly well at what it was designed to do. And as a result, was heralded as the sort of new generation of like fighters, specifically, Case after the war was tapped to build. I did an entire video series on this. You should go watch it. It's on the Polaris, but it's actually about how the Polaris was actually built. It's a 500-year-old mistake. Ever since the creation of the Idris, the UEE has constantly been wanting to build a corvette, and they constantly failed at it. So Case was originally supposed to build a corvette that was supposed to fill the same role as what the Idris was going to be before it got upgraded to a frigate. But in an accident, in a flying accident, a collision, Case was killed before he could design. And while they kept going by selling some versions of the Hurricane, they just didn't do well overall. Because the Hurricane was eventually phased out. Like, it became too obsolete. So by 2623, without Leonard Case in charge, the UEE sort of lost all interest in them, and they had to sell their company to like an IP. Like they sold it off for parts, basically. So a holding company held all the rights to it. Fast forward to 2742. A man by the name of Jude Harris Arnold is born to Pax Harris and Nidelki, Ndilimeke. Dilimik, I guess, which is with a silent end. Dilimik Arnold in Nova Kiev, Terra. And his parents were real estate moguls. He was fairly wealthy, but from a very young age, he became fascinated. Young Jude became fascinated with ships and went off to school to become a ship designer. And at school, he discovered the sort of lost designs of Leonard Case and fell in love with them and started to design ships based off of inspirations from Case Aerospace. So, fresh-faced and rosy-cheeked, he left school with this idea that he would revive the Leonard Case's legacy, and joined. The first job he got was for Aegis Dynamics as a junior designer in 2763. He was then quickly put onto Project Monitor, which we know today as, is that over here, ironically? No, not over here. As the Hammerhead. There were 3 prototypes built. One of those prototypes was made by Jude himself, though he preferred to go by J. Harris Arnold. And so Jay built this ship, a lot of responsibility for like a 24-year-old guy, and it made it all the way to quantum testing and then failed. But he reached out to his superiors at Aegis to be like, hey, what did I do wrong? How can I improve? And none of them were interested in feedback. They weren't interested in giving him feedback. So he became very distraught, left Aegis, and formed his own company, inspired by the same structure as Case Aerospace, and named the company Anvil Aerospace. Now, Anvil Aerospace is from a famous quote by MIST professor Robert Calvin. MIST is the Martian Institute of Science and Technology, who said in his book, which is called The Mechanisms of Empire, that, quote, military spending fuels the furnaces of expansion and strikes the anvils of innovation. So, Anvil Aerospace, specifically to combat or to challenge Aegis Dynamics in the spaceship manufacturing game. The first ship that he created with his team was called the Anvil Osprey, which was a light fighter that, while didn't do great, he used some of his connections with Aegis and the military to get it to in front of the eyes of the UE Navy, who adopted it at least as a prototype and built a small run of them because they liked how it functioned. From there on, he lucked out because he was still a very young manufacturer, and when the Messer era came to an end, only a couple years later. By the way, Anvil Aerospace was founded in 2772. So only about 20 years later, the Messer era comes to an end, and a new era rises with the UEE. And this new UEE is looking for a military manufacturer that has experience, that isn't tainted with war crimes like Aegis. And it just so happens that this young, charismatic, talented ship designer had created this military-specific brand towards the end of the Messer era, had some basic experience, but wasn't tainted. So Anvil Aerospace became the new Aegis, as it were, the new generation of ships for the UEE. This caught a lot of attention because all of his designs are ripped off of Case Aerospace. So quickly as Anvil began to rise in popularity, the people who owned the IP rights to Case's designs sued the fuck out of Jay Harris Arnold and Anvil Aerospace, saying, hey, no, this is our stuff. So in response, he did the biggest flex of all and just bought the company. So instead of being sued, he just bought the rights, so he actually had the rights to Case Aerospace. Now, with that all being said, let's take a look at some of these ships, because as we've known, Anvil has dramatically increased in its size and scope, and really has become sort of the main, if not secondary, ship manufacturer of the UEE. So, let's take a look at this. This is the F-7C-M Super Hornet, the Mark II. Now, the first thing I'm going to talk about is that the Hornet is one of the first ships they built after they built the Terrapin. It was the Osprey, then the not the Defender. There's another one in between there, and then there's the Terrapin, and then the Hornet. Now, the one thing I want to make clear is there is a design philosophy that is really referenced as the old Case Aerospace design philosophy. And I want you to take a look at the way this ship is landed. Take a look at the logo right there, Anvil's logo. And now take a look at this, the design of the ship and how it's landed. You should notice right away that they're the same picture. This ship is designed like the logo, because all Case Aerospace ships were deltas with a circle in the middle. And that is the routine geometry with almost every single Anvil design. Triangle, delta, with a circle in the middle. And even the ones that are more blocky still have that slope to the front to create a kind of triangle in some way, shape, or form. The Paladin has it. The Legionnaire has it. All Anvil ships have the circle and the triangle. Now that you know, look for it. You will see it in every single design ships, including the Odin. Even the Carrack has it. Yeah. All of them have it. And you can see down here, this is sort of like the ball turret area down here. So it's a design philosophy that is captured by everything that Anvil was created. Now, the Hornet is important because this ship is sort of a in-between. After the end of the Mezzer era, the Xi'an were not the main enemy, but they were still an enemy. So the UEE was looking for ships that could still compete with your typical Xi'an ship, but they were also looking for a ship that could also deal with problems at home and the rising Vanduul threat. So the Hornet was built to sort of be the best of all worlds, and as a result, it has become the best all-rounder fighter craft that the UEE has ever built. This is not the best specialty ship. Other ships that are better dogfighters, are better ground support, are better interceptors, but this ship can do everything you ask it to. Famously, one of the most famous commanders of Squadron 42, let me see what her actual name is. Reily. Reily, one of the most famous fighter pilots in UEE history. She had a quote specifically about the Hornet, which was when she first discovered, she put through all the ships she ever flew through, she put through like torture tests to figure out where they would break. So she would do simulated scenarios with every single ship, and she eventually would find some flaw in them. But when she got a hold of the Hornet, she famously said, there wasn't a scenario or loadout that I could put the Hornet through that it couldn't find its way out of. Like the damn ship was doomed to succeed. It became her favorite go-to ship because of how absolutely versatile it was in all scenarios she ever put it through. So that is the sort of legacy of the F-7A. The F-7A Mark I was a ship that was designed of its time. They learned a lot about the Vanduul, and they learned a little bit more about designs for fighters. And they, towards the end of the 29th century and the beginning of the 30th century, they sort of came back to the drawing board to create the F-7C line, because that was the F-7A, which is a civilian version. And in the process of civilianizing the Hornet, they had to take like 40% of the parts, but they also incorporated a lot of new technologies that had been developed since the original F-7A had been introduced. So the F-7C was bordering on as good, if not better, than the F-7A in certain circumstances. So taking that same design philosophy, they, after the release of the F-8, which we'll talk about here in a moment, they decided to reassess the F-7 and created the Mark II. So this is sort of the evolution of the F-7 platform to the most modern standards it can have in terms of power, loadout, speed, maneuverability, so on and so forth. That's the start of the Hornet ad. So the start of the Hornet ad is actually another quote from Reily, which is, "Give me a fully loaded Hornet and I can shake the gates of heaven." She was a huge stan, absolute fangirl for the Hornet. There's a reason why the Wildfire Hornet exists. The Wildfire Hornet is actually in honor of her, and it has her favorite loadout for the Hornet. So the Lightning, the next generation starfighter program, was founded in the 2930s, and it specifically was dealing with the fact that no longer was humanity mostly dealing with pirates and the Xi'an, but mostly dealing with pirates and the Vanduul. And the Vanduul require a very different type of very different type of, these are space planes, but very different type of spacecraft to fight. They needed to be heavier, they needed to have more ammo or more armament, but they still needed to keep the speed and maneuverability. So Anvil, taking all the lessons they'd learned from the Hornet series and other series like the Hawk before it, or the Hawk, which was a kit bash of the Hornet, things like the Valkyrie, and so on and so forth, decided to supercharge the Hornet, and they created the F8 Lightning. Now, the F8 Lightning went up against the Dogfighter 3000 by Aegis, which is likely the Saber, which eventually became the Saber, and the RSI Black Widow, which likely became the Scorpius. All of those ships ended up in service for different purposes, but this was the one that actually won and became the next generation of fighter. So this has been in service with the UE Navy since like 2935, 36. So most recently, they released the F8C series. But I do want to point out another thing. Triangle, circle. Triangle, circle. All of them have this. This thing is designed as what was the line? It's a beast, maneuverable too. It's got an insane amount of firepower, an insane from between missiles and guns. It's armored. These slanted armor, or these slanted designs, were designed to ricochet attacks, melee attacks, to sort of bounce attacks off of them from Vanduul attacks. And because Vanduul would often like to attack the cockpit, these sorts of fins that come forward are sort of shields to protect against the glancing attacks by Vanduul scythes and glaives to hit the target. So, and you'll notice that a lot of modern vessels, including the Odin, which we'll take a look at, have these sorts of slanted sides. And it just so happens that the Anvil design is naturally suitable to that sort of addition. Because triangles, you can slant the deltas pretty easy to create those sorts of sloping and sliding like crevasses to sort of glance off or to catch blades as they come through. Yeah, that's the F8C. Let's go look at the next Anvil vehicle. I'm blanking on what it is, but I think it might be the Asgard and the Pisces. So the Pisces is a unique feature, a unique thing, in that the Pisces Rescue, Crusader Rescue, Crusader Pisces, was designed as a simple auxiliary ship for the Carrack. Now, the Carrack itself has got a long history, and I've done many videos on the Carrack. I should probably do another video breaking down the Carrack in total, just together. But the Carrack itself is the result of a long discussion in military circles of whether or not to have dedicated science vessels. The Messer era was very anti-science. It just really wasn't interested in scientific innovation and scientific progress when it came to military application, if it didn't directly involve weapons manufacturing. So in the post-Messer era, this conversation came up again after I think it was a cruiser was sent out to investigate some anomaly, and then in the process, because it wasn't prepared to deal with said anomaly, ended up being lost with all hands. It was just this huge disaster that was entirely covered up by the Admiralty. And this sort of disaster ended up causing them to go, all right, well, we need a dedicated exploration ship. So they built the Carrack in response to that disaster and created the Pisces or Anvil created the Pisces as a means to give it some range. Because the Carrack is a huge ship, and sometimes you need to be able to go explore more areas that are more densely packed, maybe have more radiation or other things that would make it difficult for you to maneuver through with a Carrack. And it has gone on to be a much more versatile and useful ship. The Pisces has become a standard shuttle for many places, especially in the military, because of its small, compact design, the fact that it has a quantum drive. The regular Pisces actually has 2 seats and a pilot, plus it can hold up to 4 SCU of cargo. And the R is unique because of its, hold on, let me also show you this. What is this, chat? Why, it's a triangle with a circle in the middle. I'm telling you, it's everywhere, man. It's everywhere. If you look at an Aegis or an Anvil ship, there's a triangle with a circle. There's the circle. Square rhombus. Now, what the rescue gives up for, it still has 1 seat, but it has its own assistant, like the medical bay. It has a tier 3 medical bed that allows for full integration with regen. So it has its own Ibrahim sphere into it. It has a space for regen gel, and is fairly compact for what it does. So this has become sort of a go-to ambulance for the, especially on the frontier, for the military. But it's a military ship with civilian usages to it. All right, the last ship on our tour is the Asgard. And guess what I'm going to do, chat? Would you look at that? What's that in the center of this ship? A circle. And what does it come to? Triangle. This is like the Illuminati, like the all-seeing eye. You start seeing it, and once you know what it is, you see it on everything. The Asgard is an evolution of the Valkyrie technology, of Valkyrie project. The Valkyrie project is an important one because it was the 3rd or 4th project, or no, 5th project. It's the 5th project that they did, and they specifically want to. They specifically wanted to create a non-combat ship. And so they spent years and years and years waiting to get in line for a supercomputer to feed all the data that they needed to into the supercomputer, to have the supercomputer give them suggestions on what might happen in the near future. And when they got the data back, the data basically said a lot of stuff they already knew, but one of the things they pointed out was that it was likely that the UEE would start to reclaim lost Vanduul, so lost systems of the Vanduul, and they would need, what they lacked for any sort of planetary invasion was a compact troop carrier that had the ability to carry small vehicles or cargo. So with that in mind, on their own, they developed the Valkyrie. Little did they know that the UEE Navy was undergoing a complete overhaul of its own systems. Right before the end of the Meser era, the Navy had done its own sort of post-mortem on the Second Tavaran War. And one of the things they found out in this report was that the Navy lacked a significant, an ability to significantly shift troops. Well, not just the Navy, but the Navy, the Marines, the Army, the military, lacked an ability to be able to redeploy troops on a battlefield very quickly. Most of the stuff that was used was either slow, vulnerable cargo ships or one-time use drop pods. And those one-time use drop pods, if you dropped in the wrong place, maybe you dropped a huge force in a place where you thought there was going to be a lot of resistance and there was none, then there was no way to redeploy your troops to a place that was actively more in danger on a planet. So this study led to the creation of Starlift Command. And one of the first things they realized they needed, besides what would eventually become the Starlifter, was a troop carrier that could carry a vehicle and cargo. So they made a call out for a dropship, and Anvil didn't just apply, they applied by showing the Valkyrie, which had already been built and tested specifically for this role. And so it was adopted fairly quickly. Now, it seems like since the adoption of the Valkyrie and its success with the Marines and the Army, the folks at Anvil Aerospace began to experiment with how they could reuse that same tech and like the frames and the parts with other niches. And so one of them was the Asgard. The Asgard is sort of like the Valkyrie, but instead of having a bunch of crew service weapons, it has mostly pilot control weapons with a single turret on the bottom. But its big revolution, its big change, is that it expanded the cargo bay out and up so that they could carry more vehicles. So this is actually rated to carry Anvil Atlas chassis series, as well as Nova tanks, Storms. Pretty much all of the largest vehicles in the UE arsenal can be carried on an Asgard. It did remove some of these other elements, so there's only like a couple of seats, 2 seats. There usually was a lot more. And as I said, there's not a lot of like crew-controlled weapons. So it's mostly a vehicle transport. But because the Hercules is a good ship, but it's pretty big, and to carry one of these requires a large investment. This is a lot smaller crew requirement, a lot smaller profile, has about the same sort of footprint as a Valkyrie, so it allows for pretty rapid deployment of vehicles as needed as well. The other thing that was built off of the same technological sort of evolution was the Paladin, which sort of was taking all that idea and then going the opposite direction, where they restrict as much as possible and instead focus on ground support gunship rule. So you can think of the Valkyrie, the Asgard, and the Paladin as one family of vehicles, which share replacement parts and like design, but they're 3 distinct roles that all support each other. So I don't doubt that central con tower is going to have a circle on it. That's the whole area is going to be a circle because it points out to a point. So the Odin is a new release, likely post Vega built, and likely specifically built for the Vandul War. The details on the Odin. Let me pull up the Anvil Odin so I can give you the concepts. The Frontier has one size 12 beam, probably Hurston Dynamics. It has 2 size 12 manned 3 times size 12 guns on the top and the bottom, 3 size 10 manned size 1 guns, 1, 2, and I think there's another one somewhere around there. And then there are 8 remote size 10 guns, which are these little like telephone pole looking things that are sticking out the sides. It has 8 manned size 8 times 2 guns, which I think are these up there. Those up there. Oh, no, those are size 8 quad size 8 manned. There's 2 on either side of there. And 42 defense turrets. It also has 20 VLS tubes that are all firing size 12 torpedoes. It has a carrying capacity of 6,000 SCU. In the main hold, and on its cargo lift, it can hold 2,000 SCU. The bottom half right here of this vessel entirely is a carrier deck. It's a hangar. And these hangars are big enough that they can hold Valkyries and Asgards, is what we've seen on them. So they can hold up to medium and / large vessels inside the hold. So, this battle cruiser, box hauler, is designed kind of like a side version of a carrier. It is a carrier because it does have its own carrier capacity, though I don't think it has the same kind of carrier capacity as a Bengal, but it has far more weaponry. Its weaponry is far more diverse and especially designed to hit big. Its crew capacity is 33 to 65. So you got to up that, because if it's got a 65 crew, 3 shifts of 65, so that is 195 crew. Minimum 3 shifts. So that makes it a fairly small vessel. In terms of UE crew sizes. That sounds crazy. 195 is small? Yes, because a Idris is only slightly less than that. There's a lot of automation in this, which is a great example of the other thing to understand about the current situation in the lore. As I've said many times on this lore tour, for many of these, the UEE is currently undergoing a manpower shortage. They don't have enough people to fight the war that they're fighting. So a lot of what they need is ships that can do more with less people on them. The Polaris is a great example of that. The return of the Perseus, the creation of the Tiburon and the Hammerhead are all examples of vessels designed to support the fleet, but now they're also kind of being used as patrol vessels, so that instead of having a 130-person frigate that's controlling an entire system, you can get that same number of people into 7 different ships that all have more firepower collectively than one frigate, and take as much time and resources as one frigate would. This is sort of the evolution of that. If this is 195, let's just say, let's bump that up to about 200. That puts this thing at a fraction of the number of people required to run a Bengal carrier. Now, it's probably not including the fighters and the fighter pilots and the squadron. This probably can hold 1 or multiple squadrons of fighters into it. Remember, a squadron is anywhere between probably like 30 ships. So if you have like 30 ships, let's just say the average is like 2 crew members per ship, because sometimes you have bombers and stuff like that. You're looking at like 60 people. So it will increase the size, but unlike a Bengal, which can carry retaliators, which has crews of like, what, 8? 7, 8? This ship is designed to mostly carry crews of 3 to 4. Yes, the pilot has control of the nose laser as well. Yeah, the Bengal needs more than twice this plus all the complements. So this is sort of a future of the UE. What you're looking at is the future of the UEE and future of UE Navy vessels. Less crew, more guns, more automation, smaller package. So this probably costs half the price of a Bengal carrier. So you'll probably see a lot more of them in the verse going forward. Now, the one thing you'll notice is that none of the weapons on this are lower than 8. It does have, what was it, 46 PDCs? 42 PDCs. I didn't even pick that up. 42 PDCs. That's very cheeky there, CIG. So it does have 42 PDCs, which makes it fairly defensible, but PDCs aren't great against larger ships. So the blank spot for this ship is clearly ships that are medium to large. Size 2 PDCs. Oh, they are size 2, so they might be a little bit bigger. So this will have some weaknesses, but it's going for the Anvil sort of philosophy of armor and big guns. PDCs and US Navy numbers. How many more? How many do you want? More. I still see some free deck space. No, so the I believe these cannons, the size 12 in these turrets, are the same or similar size to the rail cannons, the Goliath rail cannons on the Idris, only ballistic. So you're looking at least the same amount of firepower with just those cannons as the Idris, as the Bengal. Anyone who's used the Perseus knows that size 8 cannons aren't really good for anything that isn't big. So these things are only going to be really used against bigger targets, and you're going to rely heavily on those PDCs to keep you safe. I would like to thank you for watching the lore tours of DefenseCon 2956. I hope you enjoyed the long video, and I'd also like to thank those on screen now for supporting the channel financially. If you want to throw in a few credits, think about becoming a member on YouTube. If you want a bit more for your contribution, join the Patreon. Patreons get early, ad-free access to all videos, including exclusive early access to my long-running complete history of Star Citizen lore series. Check those out now in the top right if you want to know what you're getting. Now, I want to hear your thoughts on DefenseCon 2956 and any other lore topics in the comments below. And as always, remember, ex Historia ad Astra.